hope you are fresh, and I hope you had a good breakfast, because we are supposed to be 70 people today, and I only count 35, so we have to work twice as hard. Twice as much contributions from you, and then we will make this morning session to be successful. A very good morning from me also on behalf of our panelists this morning. We will discuss about cross-border cooperation and discuss very interesting key topics for the cross-border cooperation in the future. I guess you already read the papers very properly, and then we will also just jump right into the middle. Just before some practical issues, we also have today this sli.do tool, so you can come with questions and taking part in the polls. When you have something, we will have a look on this during the discussion, and then we can take questions also up from this very modern tool. This session will also be web streamed, so you can maybe have some greetings to the colleagues at home or the family. Who knows who's watching it? Let's see. And of course, we will later also have a discussion, not only during the panel, but also with you. So when you have the chance to get a bit closer, then you can look into the eyes of Natalie, for example, and then have a direct dialogue maybe. So it's not necessarily you taking the back rows, but just come a bit closer if you want to. As time is running very fast this morning, I want to make a very short introduction to our panelists later on when they are coming up and sit here. So we will start with Nicholas. He will take a presentation of a very, very interesting and I think one of the best ESPON projects ever. And that's why I'm the lead partner of this project, of course, but let's see. It's your decision to vote for that. And afterwards we can have the possibility for some questions. Nicholas, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Policy Lab. So I'm going to present you, I hope this will work, yes, the main results of a very recent ESPON targeted analysis about cross-border public services. I say very recent because the final report hasn't been validated yet, but we wanted to share with you, the ESPON community, the main recommendations and lessons learned from the project. So you should have received, as Peter told you, and maybe read, I don't know, what we call a draft working paper that summarizes all this. And according to our discussions today, and also to your feedbacks, and feel free to send us anything within the next days if you wish, ESPON will propose and publish what we call a policy brief on the subject by the beginning of next year. So I will start with some words about the framework of the study, then I will explain how we define CPS and what were the objectives of the project from the beginning. Then I show you some maps and figures, the main trends at the European level, and we also talk and discuss the main challenges and potentials for developing CPS, and eventually we'll conclude with the key messages for policymakers and focusing maybe in particular on the particular cases of ETC programs, and it won't take us more than 2 hours probably. I'm joking, yeah? Up, alors. So, first map. For this project on cross-border public services, we received at first a proposal from a consortium of 10 members of the AEBR, led by Region Sonder-Jülich-Schleswig. It's always complicated for me, yeah? Represented here by Peter Hansen, our moderator today. And you can see on the map all the stakeholders areas, noticing that 3 of them are related to Austria. And we had, just for information, we had AEBR as a help desk and also the MOT involved in our steering committee. And I would also like to take this opportunity to mention the excellent research team we had. It was led by Special Foresight, Kai is over there. And let me thank especially Mrs. Sabine Zilma, who was our project manager, who's not with us today, but surely she's been for some time already a member of the big ESPON community. So let's have a look at this project that has just been completed a couple of weeks ago. What was the purpose of it from the beginning? Well, considering the existence of a very dispersed information, the first objective was to gather as much data as possible, to get an extensive overview of CPS, if possible, for all cross-border areas, and to identify policy recommendations to support their development. And for 10 border regions, the idea was to propose more in-depth analysis to provide answers to the following questions. What are the territorial needs and the obstacles hampering the development of cross-border public services? According to their local political objectives, what are the needs and potential for adapting existing services or developing new ones? So basically this was the idea, but the first problem we had is that we don't understand the same thing when we're talking about public services. So the first mission was to agree on a definition, and the scope in this case is eventually less important than sharing this definition. So still to give you some insight and the main figures, we are talking about services, we're not talking about infrastructures. So it means that a bridge crossing a border is not a CPS, a cross-border public service for us, okay? But the bus bringing people from one side of the border to the other side, then this is a service, and this is considered as a CPS. And also, a cross-border public service, a CPS, is not a short-term project or service. Huh? Let's say we have a service financed thanks to European funds that stops when funding is terminated. Then we haven't considered that as a CPS also. And also CPS are provided or made available by public authorities mainly. They address joint problems in a defined cross-border territory. They generate benefits for general public or more specific target groups. We'll see that later. And eventually they may be delivered using existing or newly established bodies or structures. So let's move to the result of the stock taking we made. Up. Here is another map. So where are CPS provided in Europe today, knowing that the project has shown that we're talking about almost 600 identified CPS at the moment? Well, they can be found all over Europe, basically, but they are spread in quite a rather imbalanced way. Highest density can be found along borders between the oldest member states, if I can say, and also in the Nordic countries. To give you some figures, we have more than 40% of identified CPS located along the Benelux borders and France and Germany. There is also a high density of CPS that can be observed along the German-Swiss, the French-Swiss, the Czech-German, and partially the Austrian-German also borders, and also the Danish-German border. So basically it appears that CPS primarily exist along borders that either have like a long-standing tradition of cross-border cooperation in areas with high density of people and population, where you have a high demand or specific needs for services of any kind, or in contrary, in some areas, like in the northern part of Nordic countries, where you have extremely low population densities and long distance between town and villages, but then where you have so many difficulties and high pressure for maintaining public services, then cross-border public services then exist. So why do these border regions invest in CPS? Because it brings added value, but basically, of course. It contributes to reducing negative border effects, it supports flows, and it contributes to better connections across the borders, and it aims to improve the quality also of existing public services, or also private service provision. That's an important point. CPS can also compensate a shortage of both public services and there again, because we talked about that yesterday, territory matters. We discussed that yesterday, but for CPS also territorial characteristics are typical drivers for CPS. And there is also one other thing, this is history, where there is a long-standing cooperation, an existing interstate or interstate or regional agreement, conventions, treaty, things like that, then there is a favorable environment for CPS, as you can notice on the map. So the map basically shows also under what kind of legal basis were used for CPS, and you can have, of course, the umbrella of EU regulation or directive, or multilateral convention, agreements, kind of treaties, or interstate agreement, but most of the time you have regional and local agreements. So all the 4 types are used as basis for CPS implementation, but in many cases there is a combination of the 4 types that is applied. Which are the policy areas? Which policy areas are addressed? So you can see the in different colors, the different thematics on the map. More CPS today are concerned with environment protection, civil protection, disaster management, transport, things like that. Followed, but only followed by spatial planning, healthcare, or education services. So it means also that the spatial distribution of the themes is also uneven across Europe, with borders that show clear focus on one topic and others with a lot of different wide range of areas. For example, in the Nordic countries, CPS have a strong focus on civil protection and disaster management, and also on healthcare. If you take the Baltic states, then it will be predominantly concerned with citizenship, justice, public security. If you take some examples like that, Czech German, Austrian German, then you will have environment protection, rather, or medical emergency care and transport services. And if you take Belgian border, then you have something really interesting about healthcare. If you take British, Irish borders, Germany and Netherlands, etc., then you have other borders where you have a wide range, an array of intervention fields with no specific one overwhelming. So given the broad spectrum of this inventory, we think that there are good arguments also to say that this distribution also reflects somehow the current policy needs for further or future potentials CPS development. Target groups, at whom are the services targeted? So basically CPS can target unspecific as well as very, very specific target groups. But there is one thing that is true, that is that we have hundreds of thousands of European citizens that benefit directly from one or several CPS, and that's probably the most important. You see in the table that 20% is about public authorities. It means cooperation between, I don't know, for example, fire brigades, hospitals across borders, and then the largest specific target groups are tourists. But you can have also, and we have identified some really small and specific target groups, as you can see on the table there, and in the document. One more thing which is interesting, it's since when CPS were operational. You can see that until 1990, only few CPS were developed every year, and since then, the number has slowly but steadily increased. That's quite impressive, and you can see also the spatial distribution in this series of maps.
Not slowly.
Yeah. Not slowly, I mean regularly. Regularly, not slowly. And there, the spatial distribution, meanwhile, you can see that. Okay, to the map. Up. All right, so now some key findings coming from the case studies and also from the selection of good practice examples you have here on the map. So on the basis of this analysis, what can we say about potentials for the future? So in order to give an indication for the likeliness for future CPS, we launched last year an online survey to complete the case studies and the desk research we made. So it means that the answers are not totally representative, but we still collect indication on 49 border relations in Europe. So there was still a good diversity of the responses. And what we discovered is that there might be a shift in priorities, in priority thematic areas in the near future. You remember at the moment CPS are not mainly, I mean, we have a lot of CPS on environment and transport and civil protection and things like that. What we see through the responses is that, for example, questioned policymakers said that cooperation between cultural heritage sites or museums are among the fields of interventions where CPS may most likely emerge in near future. That's one example. The other one is healthcare services. This is also of particular interest. And what we saw also is that most of the foreseen CPS have not yet been established because of what? Because of legal and administrative obstacles. So these legal and administrative framework conditions are the main obstacles today for the establishment of CPS. It can be like unclear competencies of policy actor, incompatible domestic legislation, even if we have also other kind of barriers mentioned, like language barriers, social-cultural divides, or economic discontinuity between borders. These obstacles are the main impediment to develop further CPS, even when there is a need that is perceived. So in our case studies, and in our 29 identified good practice examples, we have tried to illustrate mainly what we call tailor-made practical solutions to provide guidance for policymakers to address CPS development challenges. And for examples, what we say is that we should really start CPS development with little formalization as possible and make use, when possible, to existing cross-border structures rather than inventing and creating new ones. But as I said, depending on each specific territorial context, the good practice examples illustrates also the whole variety of available alternatives for managing, financing, and delivering CPS. To sum it up, we can say that CPS provision is possible along any kind of border in Europe, as long as there is a common understanding of the framing conditions, needs, and objectives for CPS provision. Then, depending on, of course, the context of each border region, several aspects should be considered in the process. We can give examples such as what task to assign to a specific CPS, what kind of infrastructure do we need, what relevant legal framework can be used, and also what kind of management and organization will be more efficient, etc., etc. What else? Some CPS can be established in some really simple ways. There's no need to be to over-complexify the things. There's no requiring complex cross-border bodies with own legal personality, etc. This is not necessary most of the time. However, it requires commitment to drive the process. It means institutional persistency, clearly. Because CPS usually are voluntary actions of local authorities. It adds to their everyday business. So it's really, somehow it puts also every service at risk in the long term, because this is the most important factor. CPS, of course, CPS development needs are starting point, most often from bottom up. So for first, when you launch first pilot action, small scale CPS, the idea really is to try to minimize formalization and only ensure that you have sufficient resources available and of course a common understanding with your partners. So because cross-border obstacles will not disappear like that, it requires action and it requires continuity in actions. Across Europe, cross-border structures like EGTC, Euro region, things like that, they have different degrees of experience in cross-border cooperation and CPS. So they should adjust their roles and activities to the level of existing cooperation in their area. Most of the time, competencies are, of course, differently distributed across the borders, and that has to be taken into account. And also, one last thing, to develop a CPS, many challenges cannot be solved at local or regional level. You will need higher administrative level to be involved, and it requires also for you to intensify the communication of cross-border needs. So for that, specific cross-border monitoring data, we know that we need that, and that's a big challenge. It could be really, really useful, and that's not really the least important challenge for the future. I will conclude with some message focusing at at the EU level, because among others, the EU institutions can pave the way for CPS development in the next programming period. In particular, to give the ETC programs the flexibility to better address local and regional challenges, to reducing the administrative burdens for beneficiaries and facilitating more investment in CPS. What we saw is that all identified solutions for developing CPS, they have the characteristic of Interreg cross-border projects, for sure. And so it led us to the conclusion that Interreg can serve as a leverage for durable operation and implementation of CPS. The success rate of Interreg projects supporting a CPS development can be increased probably through seed money prior to the application stage, as it can support, for example, the analysis of financial sustainability beyond the Interreg project. And also, evidence shows that complementary calls within the same programs or across programs covering different priorities and border segments can result in complementary projects that increase the CPS coverage, sectoral and geographical coverage. And eventually, while Interreg projects are the main lever for potential future CPS, different stages of implementation might need different complementary support mechanisms. While Interreg's cross-border cooperation has proven to work well in case of good practices, feasibility studies, pilot action, things like that, developing and testing specific solutions, especially when it comes to technical or technological one, then it can benefit from other kind of engineering capacity, for example, in the context of research and innovation grants, we think. So to conclude, I would like to say that beyond the inventory we had now and the compilation of the good practices we made, this project has showed that increasing awareness about the possibilities and the added values of CPS, basically that strengthens cross-border cooperation, and that's probably the most important lesson. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nicholas. Are there any questions dealing with the presentation, maybe some clarifications? It seems not to be the case, but of course I have one very important question. When will we get it?
Well, we will get, you will get. You have already this document, draft working paper, for which I ask you once again kindly to provide us with your feedbacks, if you wish. And we will publish a policy brief within the next week, and all the reports, documents, guidance, good examples, good practices, etc., will be on the ESPON website probably within the next weeks. Let's say January for sure.
So late Christmas gift, maybe.
Exactly.
Oh, great.
After Christmas.
Thank you. Natalie? Yeah, sure. But maybe we use a mic.
Thank you. I'm Natalie from DG Regio, European Commission, cross-border, Interreg, public services, cross-border. Just a question on the scope of the study. Did you also look at fiscal, financial aspects of these services? Because we hear a lot about the difficulties there when we, as the Commission, try to encourage public authorities in particular to look at the potential of developing cross-border services. And the second question would be, without anticipating my intervention a bit later, you mentioned obstacles of a legal or administrative nature. Does the document also contain a list of these obstacles, or have you been able to identify some of these obstacles in the case studies? And if so, do we have scope to look at the regulation that the Commission, the draft regulation the Commission has tabled on the cross-border mechanism? Do you think there is scope for us to work on that together?
To answer the last question, yes. All case studies, and also more generally, the study provides a clear description of obstacles that we found along the project and along the different kind of thematics and CPS identifies. You have that in all the documentations. And And obviously the potential new mechanism proposed in the regulation by the Commission is also mentioned as one of the key points of the policy recommendation. And your first question was about and fiscal. So financial and fiscal dimension was clearly identified as one of the main topics, but was not developed as such in this project, and this is one of the potential future dimension of future research.
Thank you. Are there other questions? No? Then we will proceed with another very important but also interesting targeted analysis. It's dealing with territorial impact assessment for cross-border cooperation, and we have Julia Wenger with us. She is from the Interreg Secretariat, Germany, Netherlands. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Peter, and good morning, everyone. So I will just shortly introduce you to another targeted analysis with a cross-border focus that we have at the moment, and that is still very much ongoing, so I won't be able to show you as much and as any fancy maps or anything. But I will just give you a short introduction from a stakeholder perspective on the aims and the status quo of this analysis. So let me start by showing you the parties involved in this analysis. So we as Interreg Germany Netherlands, we are a lead stakeholder, and the other stakeholders, as you can see, are from all over Europe, and they are all in one or another way associated with the respective Interreg programs in their regions. And we also have some horizontal parties involved, like the Commission, ABR, and the MOT, who are also are very much involved in the whole process and are following up actively on what we are doing there. And of course, we have the scientific consortium who is conducting the analysis, led by EUR, and I see Erik and Roland over there in the audience. And of course, ESPON is the lead contractor of this analysis. So, what is DICBC actually about? It's about measuring, assessing the impact that cross-border cooperation actually has on a region. And by cross-border cooperation, we particularly mean an Interreg program, but it can also be another type of cooperation that is going on there. So we really aim at arriving at a methodology for assessing this impact in an ex post way. So having a look at what have we achieved in the region. And we know that there are different methodologies out there already for this topic, but those are not really found to be fit for a cross-border perspective. And for the comprehensive analysis that we want to have here. So therefore, the main activity of this analysis is to develop such a methodology and to also test this in the 5 Interreg CBC regions that are participating in the project, with the aim of then reflecting on what actually works and what doesn't, and arriving finally at a methodology that works and that we can also present to other regions and programs all over Europe so that they can make use of it. So the most important outcomes in this respect will really be a handbook that provides a guidance on how to conduct this kind of impact assessments and also on how to use the results. And of course, we also look forward to actually having some evidence from the case studies on what is going on in our regions, and we consider this a very important outcome of the analysis as well. So a little reminder before we get to the actual status of the analysis of why we are doing this from a stakeholder point of view. So we really hope that we can, with this analysis, address the need for evidence on impacts that there clearly is in our regions. On the one hand, we really need to communicate better on the impact that we have, on what we are achieving to both citizens and any other parties that are really on the ground there and to which we are accountable for, because we are using these public funds. And yeah, we also need to communicate to create a kind of commitment on the ground and an understanding for what we are doing. And we really need those kind of evidence and the stories behind the evidence in order to do that. And on the other hand, of course, we also need the kind of evidence on impact to have a good basis for the planning of the future of Interreg in our regions. So by gaining evidence on the kind of impact we have, whether it's kind of intended or unintended impact, and also on the kind of impact that we don't have, we can gain a very valuable input for the political debates that are to come in the context of programming for the post-2020 period, but also for selecting the actual projects in our programs. And of course, other reasons for doing this is also that by cooperating in this project, we have the chance to compare different CBC programs and regions with each other, which is always a great opportunity for learning from each other. And another thing that is important in this respect is that we are, of course, aware that the availability, or more likely the lack of cross-border data, also plays an important role when addressing such a topic. So we just hope that this project gives us an impression of the most important data needs that we have in our regions, so that we kind of have a starting point for addressing cross-border data collection in the future. So so moving on to the actual status of the analysis, it's ongoing. It started in May of this year, and so far the scientific consortium has developed a proposal for the methodology. And this methodology is really, it's a mix of elements from existing TII methodologies, but it also has several unique cross-border features which are very important to us, obviously. And I don't want to go into too much detail on this methodology, also because I'm not the kind of expert to do that. But I can tell you that it kind of features a basic framework for analysis, which consists of the premise that there are 3 strands of effects that cross-border cooperation can have: socioeconomic effects, effects on sort of European integration goals, and also effects on what is called cross-border cohesion. And with this in mind, you can proceed to choosing the right indicators in your program context. And then the methodology contains guidelines for data collection, both quantitative and qualitative data, with the premise being that quantitative data may be the preferred option, but qualitative data is also a good option, and also it addresses the issue of data gaps, because when you want to conduct an analysis like that, then you need data at the right geographical level, and also data for the right timeline that you want to assess the impact for. So this is addressed in the methodology, and what is also important is that the methodology is describing ways for assessing the net impact of an Interreg program. So the actual impact that the program has, and not the impact that is due to other factors that might play a role. So for that, several, both quantitative and qualitative ways are described. And so right now we are testing all of this in our 5 CBC regions, among others my own region. And it's really the question, what kind of elements are the most useful, and how can we really put this into one comprehensive methodology that we can work with in the future. Because these case studies in the regions are just starting now in most of the regions, and we are not really very advanced yet. I cannot really tell you much about the content on which we are working, because the main work so far has kind of been on the methodology. But what I can do is give you some first impressions from my personal kind of view on the work so far. One of the impressions being that whoever you come across and whoever you tell about this project, and whoever is also kind of involved, I think from the scientific consortium to the people on the ground that we've actually had in an expert workshop last week in our region, they all very much understand of why this is important for us, this topic, but they also very soon see that it is a very complex and ambitious task, and that is really challenging area to work in. Another thing which we experienced in the case studies so far, at least in my region, but it's probably not very different from the other regions, is that data availability is really an issue. So if we would rely on existing and quantitative data only for having a look into territorial developments and impact, we wouldn't get very far in our analysis. So a qualitative assessment of certain cross-border developments by designated experts, and maybe also something like case studies might play a big role in the methodology in the end, which also involves a lot of practical challenges and also methodological issues. But that's something that we need to work on in the future. Another interesting discussion that we had among the stakeholders and with the service provider was about the actual territorial level that should be used for conducting the impact assessments. And that also stressed that there is kind of a difference between what might be desirable from an analytical point of view and what is the actual reality in our programs, and what actually makes sense from a cross-border perspective. Basically that's it for now. I'm sorry that I cannot tell you much more at the moment, and that we have not any fancy maps or anything yet, but we will do that at the next ESPON seminar for sure. And now I'm looking forward to proceeding with this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia. Are there any questions from the audience? That seems not to be the case, so maybe we'll come with something up later. And as I can see, the internet is not used too much right now, so there's still possibilities. Then we will start our panel discussion. I want to invite you two up to the stage. With the panel will be, of course, Niklas, as you just heard, and Julia, and then we will be joined from Jean Perroni, the director of the MOT, and Nathalie Verschelde from the DG Regio. Warmly welcome to you too. We are starting with some introductory statements from the panelists, but just remember we want to focus on cross-border cooperation and the key policy questions dealing with contributing to territorial cohesion at cross-border transnational and regional level, territorial coordination of policies. We want to focus on territorial cohesion implementation mechanisms, and strengthening the territorial cohesion at the EU level. So very interesting, very big points. And now we'll hurry up. Jean, would you start?
Good morning to everybody. Thank you for inviting MOT to comment a little bit. First, I would say that I congratulate both projects. They really contribute to understanding and improving cross-border cooperation. I will mainly comment the first one because it's closer to most focus on projects, but the other one as well is quite interesting. Well, basically, I share most of the analysis and of the recommendations. I would like to concentrate on the issue of obstacles. I will take an example, the example of the cross-border hospital in Sardinia. Sorry, some people say, well, you always speak about the same examples, but there are not so many full examples, and so I like this one, sorry. And I want to make a little detour, because before speaking about a cross-border hospital, I think it's useful to think what is an hospital? I mean, in a non-cross-border context. And this might not be so simple. I mean, because a hospital, for instance, in a rural area, it can be a challenge to keep the hospital in the rural area. And so we have to consider the different dimensions of the question. A hospital is always, I would say, a functional system. It's a machine that delivers care. A hospital is also an economic issue, because it's you insist on the fact that you want to study public services, but there is always a mix of public and private, and it depends on the national health systems. But in France, for instance, health is a mixed topic, and in any case, the public services have to demonstrate their affordability. So there is an economic dimension. It's also a politic dimension, because when it's about an hospital in a rural area, you have to take decisions. The local politicians want to keep their hospital. The regional or national ones sometimes want to concentrate territorially, so it's a topic. And of course, there is always, and perhaps the most important, is the human factor, because at the end, it's nurses or medical people that want to care ordinary people, and it's also about commitment and human things. And when you are in the case of a domestic hospital, all these dimensions are combined. There are very complex trade-offs. But what is clear is that you have a national framework to solve these trade-offs. I mean, you have legislation, you have political discussion, you have the practice, you have the culture of each country or region, and this doesn't solve the obstacles, but it gives a framework. And if you think now about the cross-border hospital, finally, it's the same problems. But the difference is that you have the border. And I would say probably the most difficult is not so much each category of obstacle. Because if you take two medical people discussing about a care process, perhaps they have different approaches, but at the end they will agree to take decisions. And the same if you take people dealing with the economy side. I mean, they will discuss about a solution, or even legal. You can have two legal persons that will find an arrangement, or even politicians. But the point is, obstacles are mixed. Most of the cross-border obstacles will be a mix of the different kinds of obstacles. And my feeling is that very often behind a legal obstacle you can have a political obstacle. And this is, for instance, when a local person will find a solution for a cross-border obstacle, he will very often have to go to the national administration or the regional administration, and there you will have a civil servant that sometimes will say, well, it's not possible because of legal, because of us. I would say, sovereignty of the state and legislation. And this is where there is really a cross-border and European dimension, and this is where we have the toolbox of European intervention, and it's very clear that Interreg is important in this regard. And for instance, in the hospital of Sardinia, it funded the walls of the hospital, which is, it was a 30 million euro ERDF. Perhaps sometimes it's also necessary to have other funds that Interreg, in most of cases, I would say. But indeed, this case it was really important. You have also these legal tools like EGTCs to fund to carry the governance of the hospital. But it's not enough. And this is where I want to make the link with the new draft regulation, because this regulation is supposed to solve obstacles, and I would say it has two very important dimensions. The first one is, of course, to allow the possibility to have these local solutions found through the implementation of the legislation of the other side of the border. And in the case of Sardinia, it would have certainly much accelerated the process to do so in various technical or legal questions. But I would say that probably the most important dimension of the regulation is also about the creation of a process. And what I said before, I mean the fact that when you locally have the solution, then you will have a problem maybe with your national administration. And because the regulation, if it is created, if it is developed, it will really create a sort of obligation for the states that are concerned, not to say necessarily yes to everything, because states still are there and they have their own legitimacy and constraints, but the states will have either to say yes or no and provide another solution, or if it's no, to say why, and it really creates, I would say, an explicit political discussions, and states will be obliged to set this network of national focal points, working on each border with the other side, and coordinated by DG Regio and the European focal point, and creating a sort of base of experiments about these cross-border obstacles for public services. And there I want to finish by something more linked with, I would say, big policy. It's about public services in general, not only cross-border. If you take, for instance, the crisis in France, but it could be said for other countries, in France, the state is historically legitimated by public services. It's very clear in the French history. And one of the aspects of the present crisis with the yellow vests it's a crisis of public services, basically, because people have the feeling that they pay more taxes to have less public services in some areas, and they are lost. And the point is the world is changing, and the public services have to adapt to change of localization of activity, to climate issues, to control of mobility, etc., etc. And this is where I would say that for the border areas, cross-border public service is really an opportunity to not only to deliver better services, sometimes for less money, to the people, but also to make people aware of the added value of cross-border cooperation in Europe. So we have a direct link between this issue of cross-border public services and the general integration across borders and at European level. So I really think that it's a good topic for ESPON, perhaps not only to work on cross-border public services, but also more generally to work about public services, change of dialectics between functional and institutional dimensions, like Andreas Faludi explained yesterday. So it's really a good topic for ESPON. Thank you.
Thank you. I know you were working very hard with border obstacles during the last years, Jean, and I think that's interesting for all of us dealing with cross-border cooperation. The question is, will that work ever stops? Is there a vision in your head?
I think that something that strikes me, but I think it strikes everybody working on these cross-border issues, is that the more you work on these issues, the more obstacles you find, but the more solutions you find. So it's really a story that is, you could say it's a little bit like Sisyphe, but on the other hand, it's also, I would say even a pleasure or an interest. I mean, coming back to the story of the civil servants, or more generally in the people involved in the cross-border cooperation, not only public services, sometimes when they discover the topic, I would say, when a national civil servant is nominated on a border, the first reaction will be, oh, this is complex, this is outside my business as usual practical action, but when they seriously take the project, they are converted somewhere, and it changed also I would say the narrative of the people. Coming back to yesterday, and I think that it's an opportunity for all these people, not only of course for the citizens, which is the more important to improve their life. Allowing to cross the borders, but also for all the people involved, it's really something valuable to meet this cross-border dimension, and it's probably also part of the solution for the European issues. I mean, to have people be more taken in contact with people of other countries, be it in border areas, but also through Erasmus of all sorts all over Europe. I mean, it's also through meeting really the other people, not only in Brussels or in Strasbourg, but in other countries, and combining these different national approaches. This is part of probably the solutions about the EU fatigue, or European fatigue, I would say.
Thank you. Now the more official part from the DG Regio. Natalie, what can you contribute with the future and the problems? Hopefully more future than problems.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for the introduction as well. Those who know me, and I think there's a number of people in the room who know me quite well, you will know that the word official part is hurtful. Because this is not how I see the work that we are doing at the moment in my unit. Anyway, yes, sorry. Can I have the little flicker? Because I don't want to show all the slides at all. I just want to concentrate on a few. So I understand I'm invited because I work in an institution which plays a big role, or tries to play a big role in cross-border cooperation, and especially in providing tools for cross-border cooperation. And I guess most of you are interested to hear what the Commission has in mind with the recent proposals that have been tabled, legislative proposals. So that's not really very sexy, but it does have an influence because it will shape a little bit how the European budget can help us in cross-border cooperation. So I feel obliged to touch upon some of the legal aspects, but okay, it's not the most sexy, but I'll try to make it a bit sexy. Yeah? Some of the key messages for the future. We have managed, by very hard work inside DG Regio, to get to a point where cooperation between regions, and in particular, I would say between border regions, is no longer limited to Interreg. And for those of you who will need to work in detail with structural funds in the future, the main regulation actually forces the other programs, the non-Interreg programs, to spell out what they will do with other regions in certain thematic areas. So this is a change of paradigm, because in the past we've always said, well, you do your stuff on your territory. If you wish to work with others, you can. This time we're saying there are things that you need to do with others. Please tell us. And if you don't want to, also tell us why not. And this is fundamentally different. And it means also that in the context of reduced financial resources for cohesion in general and for Interreg, unfortunately, we hope that other funding sources will help us to increase the levels of cooperation. I will also want to stress that we would like to see a much stronger territorial dimension in the future in Interreg, and I'll come back to that. Simplification, you know about the external borders. I don't need to touch upon that today unless you want to in the discussion. Also wanted to highlight the fact that we have put in the regulation, the Interreg regulation, a specific objective for the governance of cooperation, because we've heard, I think, this morning already, how important it is to find the right way to work with each other, to know each other, first of all, to understand how each other operates, what are the levels of competencies, and who needs to be around the table to address certain issues. And we've made money available for that explicitly this time, up to, well, actually no, minimum 15% of each program will have to be spent on governance issues, which we think is a way to strengthen the institutional side of cooperation and making it sustainable, and not just ad hoc, project by project, but with a real long-term perspective. I think I will skip this. Okay, so I said that we would like to be more territorial, and I think there are a few fundamental principles there. We have differentiated, for instance, cross-border. We have differentiated inside cross-border the land cooperation from the maritime cooperation. We think it makes sense from a territorial perspective because the type, the nature, the scope of cooperation across a stretch of water is not really the same as cooperation across land, where you can simply even walk across the border and do something on the other side. Of course, we have to write a regulation which applies to the whole territory, and it's a challenge because there are very specific situations. There are also a few places in Europe, not very many, where the stretch of water is not necessarily a hindrance, and that's why we have excluded from the maritime world the fixed linked areas, like the Öresund area in Malmö, Copenhagen, where the bridge has completely changed the interaction there. But we have a few issues here and there with a few places where there are fast crossings and fast ferries, and we're having discussions on that. This is not at all been received well, and my personal feeling is that it will be killed by the member states and by the parliament. And I'm very sad about that, because I think we are doing the right thing. I'm convinced we are doing the right thing, but we have to always fight conservative forces, and people see it more. I think they don't look at what we mean territorially. I think they look at, maybe 12 existing programs will disappear. I mean, the programs, the management structures will disappear. And that's true, but I don't think this is a good enough reason to not do this, if you see what I mean. So we think territorially we make sense, but we are not very hopeful that this will fly, and I think it will be a real shame. We, number 2 and 3 here, say a little bit the same thing. When it comes to land borders, we really want to sell the concept of continuity and fighting discontinuity, maybe, and to see the cross-border areas as single spaces. And we go back very much, of course, to the concept of cross-border public services. Here, too, we're having some issues because we have tried to go back to the real territory by the border, and we have also said that your main focus should be the not 3 areas which are along the border, but we have also got rid of the notion of eligible area, meaning that we do not think that the projects and the partners from the projects must come from that area, because it doesn't really make much sense. And that area is defined again by administrative boundaries, does not reflect the territorial reality necessarily. So we have put in here a flexibility, a certain flexibility. And again, I'm really sad that this has not been understood at all correctly. And it seems to me that people need boundaries. I mean, you tell them, we don't want to give you a boundary, and they say, well, what am I going to do? How do I decide if a project is eligible or not, if I don't have a boundary? And this is, again, you know, we have to work on this. I hope also with you guys. You don't necessarily come from the Interreg management world, but convincing the Interreg programs that not having an eligible area should not be seen as an issue, but more as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do much more, you know, much more relevant stuff. And also, if you talk about, for instance, joint public transportation, you know, the actors of public transport will not necessarily be in the program area, they will be outside, but they can work and have a big impact on the cross-border area, which is what matters in the end. So just wanted to give you these key messages. And we are going to try and produce position papers. So these will be simply not official views of the Commission, but much more the Commission's opening gambit, if you want, in the negotiations of the next programs. The Commission saying, this is how we see your cross-border area, tell us whether it's right, and let's discuss what we need to do to change that area for the better for the citizens. Because, as Jean said, all of this we do with the citizens in mind. I mean, we don't do this just to have a machine that spends money. We want to do it to change lives and to give opportunities. You see here on the screen, I wanted to show you that because this is a map produced by our Joint Research Center, the Commission's Joint Research Center, which is illustrating here the time it takes to go from one point to the other across a border. That's Germany, Poland, you will have recognized. So the red dots are the crossing points. And then the gray area is the area, when you are within the gray area, it takes you about 30 minutes to get to the border. So we think that defining the border area, not in legal terms, but in terms of where we want to make an impact, this kind of map can help. Because it doesn't correspond to the NUTS 3. You can see even some NUTS, well, you don't see it very clearly, but there are some NUTS 3 that touch the border for a very small, is there a pointer here? Yes, I think this is a pointer, yes. You can see here, for instance, there's a NUTS 3 with a very small stretch on the border, and then the NUTS 3 goes like this. And we define, sorry? Ah, to the screen, oh, sorry. Which one? Here. The NUTS 3 is on the border here, and then it goes up like this. And are these people who are going to be interested in cross-border cooperation, or whose life we can change with the limited funds of Interreg cross-border? There's a question mark. The answer might be yes, might be no. People who live here, probably more so. Probably more so. We are going to, I'm not saying, this is just a draft map, and the GRC is doing for us 30 minutes, 60 minutes, and 90 minutes from the border. We might have a map with the 3 different colors, and then engage with the programs on the discussion on what is the program area and functional area. And then we also have, so this is what it would look like if you look at simply the European scale. So the thickness of the line represents accessibility to the border. Also some interesting stuff on population. We've never really looked too closely at the regional dimension of population changes, at least in my unit, from a cross-border perspective. And we are going to also get these figures for every single border from our colleagues. And you can see that in some cases, you have a national pattern on population change, which is quite different from the one in the border areas. And I think these are important things that we need to communicate to the programs, the authorities managing the Interreg programs, because they play a role in deciding how effectively, where do we put the money to effectively change things if we want to change them, obviously. I look after the program Romania-Bulgaria, and this is a program area where there's a colleague here from the managing authority. It's quickly depopulating. It's quickly depopulating. Romania is also depopulating. Bulgaria is depopulating. But if you look at the border figures, the trend is really much more pronounced in the border areas. Clearly, the two governments have to decide whether they want to keep people in that area. I think they should, and if they do, we need to discuss how we can do that. So we will put a big emphasis on the territorial, and I put spatial because with a question mark. We don't really talk much about spatial planning in DG Regio. We would like to look at how we can integrate the territory much more from different perspectives. And if you have read the communication that we issued last September on boosting border regions, you will recognize a lot of stuff there. The labor market integration, because for us it's not about migration or free movement of workers is important, but what we have in mind is much more giving people the opportunity to stay where they want to be, possibly in their hometown, but having opportunities for work across the border, not needing to migrate or to leave with the whole family, for instance, and having access, organizing the labor market in the cross-border area. You would be surprised at how many obstacles there still are if you want to do that. And it's the whole spectrum. It's from education, the provision of education you might already question, but certainly the recognition of any type of education that you have received is very difficult. We have European legislation in some cases, but in most cases we don't. And it's a very complicated process, all the way to taxation, access to benefits, social security, obviously, and pension rights. So it's very, of course, access also, physical access to the other side if you want to go and work there. So we need to look at that. We also would like to look at the education, training, and lifelong learning, because we noticed that in border regions, very often, you have less education establishments than you have in other types of regions, of course, excepting the border regions, which are also capital regions. If you see Vienna, obviously we can't say that there is a lack of education opportunities in Vienna, but border regions are very different across Europe. And in certain cases, it makes sense to look at integrating your education systems a bit more, and specializing the institutions in different types of education so that you have a critical mass to do a good job. Healthcare, Nicolas, you mentioned that it's one of the most promising area for cross-border public services. Yes, we had a conference on Tuesday in Brussels, a big conference on cross-border healthcare. It's clear that this is one of the hot areas for cross-border cooperation at the moment, including the organization of emergency services, and we would like to see a lot more of that. We have also to really look at public transportation. Many obstacles there. Not so many great examples of fully integrated cross-border public transportation systems. That's also why I was asking about the fiscal and financial aspects, because we find that it's complicated apparently for local authorities to organize the financing of such services. All in all, what we want to do is give people who live in border regions more opportunities, or at least equal opportunities of access to services and to jobs. Right, I just want to finish with one more slide, which is the one on completing the toolbox. Can't get there. Okay, just, yeah, one more. The toolbox, you know, Europe can provide only, in my opinion, tools, and it's really for the actors on the ground to use the toolbox effectively, to pick the different tools that they need, because we have such a variety of, yes, thank you, such a variety of situations in border regions. Yeah. So we want to complete the toolbox. We have financing with Interreg and other types of funding, not only Interreg. We have legal bodies that can be established, joint legal bodies. For instance, the European Grouping of Territorial Cooperation, EGTC, which is the European one, but there are also other bodies like that. We want to complete this with a mechanism, and this is not a body, this is to establish a legal way in which member states or regions can resolve legal obstacles or administrative obstacles. We had promised to do that last year. We have been working on that with particularly France and Luxembourg for the past 3 years. So we've delivered on our promise and tabled a proposal. We think that the proposal is quite far-reaching, and the member states clearly think it's too far-reaching. It's been received very, how can I say this diplomatic? We are web-streamed, right? Yes. So let's say that there is a clear reluctance in the majority of member states to follow us on that path. I think possibly because the proposal is a little bit too bold, it's possibly going a little bit too far too quickly. I hope the member states are not watching the web stream. So we need to maybe think a little bit about it. But what is really worrying to me is that member states are seeing this as an attack on their sovereignty. And as Jean said, the regulation clearly says that you can also decide as a member state that there is no solution to a certain obstacle. It says that clearly in the regulation. It's not an obligation to find a solution. The obligation is to accept that somebody raises an issue and to look at it. That's the obligation. You must look at an obstacle that is signaled to you as a member state. But you can conclude that either there is an immediate solution and here it is, there is a solution, but for that we need the parliamentary democratic process to work, and therefore we can't promise you a solution now, but we will put something in the decision-making pipeline in our country, including parliament, and therefore we don't guarantee the answer because it's a democratic process. And the third option is, very sorry, but there is no solution to this problem. So it's all there in the regulation. So sovereignty, you know, I have my doubts. We are discussing this now with member states, and we also with the parliament. There is a very interesting report from a rapporteur in the parliament, and he is making constructive proposals to maybe adapt the regulation here and there. We are very willing to listen to that and very willing to engage. But at the moment, I don't really feel we have a constructive dialogue with the member states because we are still stuck a little bit in this sovereignty question. So we need to probably overcome that by explaining a bit better what we want to do. So sorry, I'm taking far too long. That's my normal, sorry about that. I can never stick to 5-6 minutes. So my key message is, I think the territorial dimension for the next generation of cross-border programs will be stronger. We are in shared management mode, which means that we need to strike a deal with the partners in each member state and regions. So we will make our case, but in the end, we will have to agree a program together, and we will see what comes out of that. And thirdly, the toolbox, if the mechanism survives the negotiation process in its current shape or in a slightly amended shape, we think the toolbox is really complete for an effective impact on cross-border regions that we can then measure with the TIA-CBC tool when it's ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. As the internet never sleeps, we got 2 questions, and I think you should be the first to maybe give an answer to that, because they're really interesting, also dealing with the new regulations. The one, and then we can maybe ask the 2 together for you. Will we see a boost of cross-border public services with the new regulations? And the second, that's maybe not only a statement but also a question. Many policymakers on micro level complains about the bureaucratic procedures behind Interreg funding, and is Interreg creating obstacles on its own? So what do you think, how will these questions be asked in the future?
Will we see an increase in cross-border public services? The answer is we hope so. This is for sure one of our priorities. If you combine the new regulation on the table with the communication of last year on boosting border regions, you will see the packages there to actually push for the development of cross-border public services. But of course, this is it's a partnership, so we will push. We hope that there will be a positive response also from the member states, from the programs, and from the beneficiaries then, because the guys who are developing the cross-border services need to mobilize and need to have the patience, the resilience, the commitment, the engagement that Nicolas mentioned before. So if the conditions are there, for sure, yes. For us in the Commission, it's a top priority. Well, the burden and the bureaucracy, I can only give you the technocratic answer to that. We have tried very much to simplify everything connected with the administration of Interreg projects. But again, we are in a partnership, so there are things that are being accepted easily by the fund managers. I would call them the fund managers in that particular respect. But there are also things that people resist. It requires a significant change of mind if you want to simplify, because you need to accept that you lose a bit of control. You need to accept a higher level of risk. But there are ways in which you can actually deal with that. The problem is to convince people that this is the way to go, rather than put 5-6 layers of bureaucracy to be sure that everything is okay. There are many other ways to have a high level of certainty, legal certainty, without needing all these different layers. So we can only hope that this will be taken up again by the authorities. We will certainly fight for it again. And we have made proposals, for instance, in the audit world. I don't want to go into the detail, but if you read the audit approach for Interreg post-2020, if it survives Council, again, if it survives the negotiations with member states and parliament, the audit work will be drastically reduced, which means that, we can maybe breathe a bit more easily and spend less time worrying about the next audit.
Thank you. Only a few minutes left, but I think there were some arms raising with questions. Here too. Can we get a mic? Mike?
Yeah, Erich Dahlhammer, Austrian Institute for Regional Studies, ÖIR. Natalie, your maps you presented were very interesting for me as spatial planner dealing with regional policies. And the question is about your approach of the position papers. Could you a little bit more explain the content and your expectations the member state are dealing with it and the role they play for you as Commission in negotiating then the programs?
There was another one right here.
Yeah, thank you. Jens Kurnohl, I'm with the German Federal Institute for Research on Building, Urban Affairs and Spatial Development. And I was one of the coordinators of the joint vision for the German-Polish interaction area. That's why I got a bit nervous when you showed the map, as Erich already said. I mean, we are talking about functional areas, and I think it's quite good, and I fully agree with you that the territorial dimension is much stronger in the new regulations, in your proposal of the regulations. I think we can stress that bit much stronger than we could in the current period, not only on the cross-border level, but also on transnational level. But anyway, talking about functional areas, when you showed that map, I mean, we were talking about borders, overcoming borders. And, but with this accessibility, we are actually introducing new borders with this 30 minutes driving time, travel time to the border. And then you ask whether these people feel like living in a border region. I mean, we really have to look at functional relations then. And if I think of Szczecin, which is the center of Pomerania, which has historically always have been the center of Pomerania, it has a much bigger hinterland than just 20 or 30 minutes driving time to the border. So this is really just nobody living there basically within 30 minutes up in that area. So I think this is really something that we need to consider, and that you also might need to consider in your position papers, that the functional relations are much wider than, let's say, 25 kilometers or 30 minutes driving time. Having said that, I would like to thank the stakeholders of the two projects. I think it's a very important topic that you raise. Also with the cross-border public services, this is definitely something that we will also work on. And the second thing is about territorial impact analysis. When it comes to data and to monitoring, yes, I mean we are working on improving the monitoring. And there's a really stupid thing. We are talking about functional areas in cross-border cooperation, but actually we can't define and we can't show the functional areas because we don't have the data. And an example from Germany that we are working on, our social security systems, they collect the postal codes of cross-border commuters. But these are not put into the statistics. They get lost from filling out the forms, and then from being able to analyze the statistics. Somewhere in between they get lost because the law is not up to it. So these are the very obstacles in terms of monitoring that we have to overcome in the next couple of years.
Thank you. Once more here in the first row.
Thank you very much. Just a small comment on what Nathalie said. I mean, Nathalie, you expressed surprise and almost regret that member states bring in talk about sovereignty, yeah? And as if you were attacking sovereignty. Well, unfortunately, that is your institutional brief. That is what you should be doing. You should be delimiting and reducing the sovereignty of member states. And now you're also attacking the definition of local areas. Yes, I mean you're talking about functional spaces. Jens said it just now, instead of territories. Again, because that is what the situation requires. Yeah? So don't tell us as if you were not into this business. That is the institutional brief of the whole Commission. That is what European integration is about. And you are right in the middle of that battle. So good luck. Good. I mean.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the encouraging words. I think I haven't recovered yet from the orientation debate we had on this mechanism, where the words Brussels diktat were used by certain people. And it was very, it's painful to hear because indeed my idea is that I work to make sure that sovereignty doesn't get into the way of the beautiful European integration project. Unfortunately, when you go to council, I don't go there very often, but whenever I go, I don't know, I feel we are, miles away from this concept. And if you watch the GAC, I don't know whether you watched the General Affairs Council was web streamed last week, and it's really clearly, national sovereignty is just there. It's massive. It's just in the room. It's the big thing in the room all the time, and it's complicated. And I think it's probably worse the last few years than it has been in the past. That's my personal experience. And when you talk about Interreg, by definition, you want to go against that, and you break it. You're right, but it's very complicated. At least the echo from the member states is not all of them, not all of them, but I think from a majority, the echo is that you get back is not what you want to hear. Sorry, and that's for the kind of little bit of a therapy session. The position papers. Okay, so the Commission has ways of putting to the member states a few things that need to happen. This is not going to be one of them. This is going to be a very low-key, informal exchange with the member states, the position papers. They are not going to be the European semester, the country-specific recommendations. Even last time we had position papers on the structural funds. This is not going to be it. It's going to be much more of a technical nature. The picture that we take from a certain border area, taking also into account our experience of Interreg since 1990 in some parts of Europe, more recently in other parts of Europe, and as I said, an opening gambit, because the negotiation is a 2-year process where it's very different from border to border. Sometimes it's the member states have the hand, and they set up groups of experts who discuss what should happen in a border area. Sometimes the regions have the hand and they lead the way. Sometimes it's a mixture, so it's quite different. But in each case, we are associated to the process at a certain time, not necessarily from the beginning and not suddenly right at the end, but we are very much associated. And what we wanted to do this time is to come to the table for this informal exchange with something. Rather than simply with ears open, we thought we would also do a bit of our homework and have something in our hands which shows certain aspects of the border region that need to be addressed. So this is what it's going to be. And what we have decided to do is we are using the same data sets for all the papers. The basic approach is the same data set, so we are de facto already limited in some of the things we can say, because as we've already said, the data is really incredibly patchy when it comes to measuring cross-border stuff. So we have dug into different data sources, tried to find meaningful data that we can use. But then we've also then looked at existing local or regional documents. We've, of course, followed very closely the Moro project, Jens, launched by your administration. I mean, beautiful, fantastic project. You have areas like the Upper Rhine, where they have a convention and they have a political statement and priorities. The Grande Région is the same. And then we have some areas where there is nothing. There is no research going on, or not even research. There's no space in which cross-border is being discussed systematically. And there we have to rely on what we can find. And that's what we're trying to do with the position papers. Now, on the map, I think I gave the wrong impression with that map. What I was trying to show there is that, indeed, we want to go to the functional area concept, and we want to move away from the NUTS 3 concept for implementation of the programs. Because the NUTS 3 is just, you know, I'm sorry to say, but the NUTS 3, you have seen, you had the map of all the NUTS 3 on your, when you showed your partnership. You could see the diversity of sizes and shapes. So we want to move away from that as the factor determining a program area. And we don't want to replace it by the 30 minutes. Huh? That's not it. If we show a map where we show the people there, this is a 30-minute band, this is a 60-minute band, this is a 90-minute band, it means that you might want to do different things. Because if you live 90 minutes away, you might not do the same activities as if you live 30 minutes away. You might not go to work necessarily on the other side if you live 90 minutes away. But if you live within a 30-minute range, you might. I mean, you're shaking your head. I know, but I'm simplifying, but this is to show where, you know, exactly that functional area depends on the activity that you want to support. And of course, bassin d'emploi in French, which is this, you know, employment functional area, will not necessarily be the same as bassin santé or the basis that you need to take into account for your public transportation. So we want to ingrain into people's mind this notion of functional and differentiated areas according to what you want to do. That's what we want to do with these maps. Yeah? I did not want to say that we would replace one set of boundaries by another. It's much more to make people think, aha, if I live here, I live within a range, a very close range of my border region, of my border. If I'm here, I seem to be further away, but I'm still within 30 minutes. That's interesting.
Jean?
Perhaps a short word to also end up with an optimistic view. We hope very much that the new regulation will be adopted, but it's not fully sure, I would say. But in any case, things are changing. I wanted to mention that between France and Germany, there will be a new Treaty of Élysée. For those who don't know, in 1963, there was the Treaty of Reconciliation between de Gaulle and Adenauer. So there will be a new treaty to be signed in January, and this treaty will incorporate a chapter on cross-border cooperation, and the two countries will commit to make monitoring, so this links with the topic of TIA, so the two countries will commit to progress in this regard, but also, of course, to progress with a common strategy and vision about cross-border cooperation, and also to monitor and to check priority projects and also obstacles, and also give more possibilities for Euro districts and local authorities to have, I would say, competencies and accelerated procedures, as it is written just yet, to solve these obstacles. So I would say it gives a good flavor, and certainly there are also progresses on other borders. And just perhaps to finish also about Andreas' question, I think that the question of sovereignty shouldn't be a zero-sum game. Sharing sovereignty in a cross-border or European context is supposed to be a win-win game. So let's cross fingers.
Thank you. As time is over, I have good news, of course, too, because on the one hand, there's coffee now, and the second is, I think our colleagues will also get a cup of coffee, so ask them all the questions you might find on the way out to the coffee bar. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for you. See you again at 11 o'clock. Thank you.
Can you take your seats, please, ladies and gentlemen? Before we make a start here, there are two organizational points from me here moderating. First of all, we have found a folder, a Hewlett-Packard laptop, and a glasses case that was in one of the briefings rooms. So if these belong to you, then please come and collect them from up here at the front. Any takers of the laptop and the glasses case? whoever they are, they don't seem to be in this room, or they're too embarrassed for having lost their computer. Hope there's no government secrets on this computer here to be found. Anyway, that's the first organizational announcement. The second is, because the timing is short for this panel, please pose your questions using the Slido app. When you do that, posing the questions using the Slido app, if you'd like to address your question to one individual speaker, please name that speaker in your question. Otherwise, we will have to just make our own decision up here at the front who is being addressed by that particular question. So please, yes, once again, the details are up there on the screens. Please log into the Slido app to be posing your questions to this panel. So from that, then, I'm going to introduce each of the panelists in turn when they're going to give their presentations. They've each got some slides and some statistics to present. So this panel is entitled A Presentation of Selected New ESPON Research. Our first expert is Elisabeth Licodiani, who is from Valdani Vicarian Associati in Italy, who's presenting about material cultural heritage as a strategic territorial development resource, the ESPON Heritage Project. So Elisabeth, over to you to make your presentation, please. Up at the lectern. Thank you.
So, good morning, good afternoon from me. I am going to present you some the structure and the idea, the concept of a project that we are commissioned at VVA in Brussels on measuring the impacts of material cultural heritage in Europe. This is a project that is going to present a first go on a monitoring system on how in the future we can measure these impacts of material cultural heritage, as there are many differences in the data that are existing. And it is quite a challenging task to do. So in my short presentation, what you will see is what are the objectives and what are the expected outcomes of the project. How do we define material cultural heritage to start with? Which are the research questions around which the project has been built up? The geographical scope and the sector selected, the key steps and indicators that we use, and the timeline so that you know when you should expect to see some results. Starting with the objectives, the main objective is to quantify the contributions of material cultural heritage, and a task not easy to do. We have chosen the past 5-year period from 13 to 16, according to availability of data. So basically, in order to quantify these contributions, what we need to do is to define a common theoretical framework on how these contributions can be materialized, can be measured, to identify the impact, report what we have found, and propose. I would say this is one of the first times that we will propose a monitoring system of how we can organize this impact assessment or impact measurement in the future. How do we define material cultural heritage in our project? So we go and measure movable and immovable objects, movable like paintings and books, immovable like archaeological sites, landscapes, which are objects which have been recognized to have heritage value in each country. Of course, here you expect to see difference in each country, but we try to harmonize it in a way. We take into account historical building stocks, pre-1919 buildings, and places where movable material cultural heritage objects are stored or exhibited, and these are, for example, museum or archives or libraries. This definition is an operational definition. In different countries, we will have different ways of measuring, of different ways of defining what is contributing to the cultural heritage of a country, but here we try to take an operational decision on how to define this contribution in order to move forward to a monitoring system. the research questions that we had to deal with in order to move forward, which, okay, when talking about the socio-economic impact of material cultural heritage, which are the economic sectors that we have to look into, which are the sectors where we see these impacts and therefore where we can measure the impacts. How do we measure if we have found the sectors? How can we compare the results? Especially we are talking about countries where different types of concepts are used. And at the end, how can we propose a way to monitor this at the territorial level and have a proposition that can be used in the future in a more on a more regular basis? In order to collect data and to see what is existing and to finally propose our monitoring system, we focused on countries defined by ESPON and by the consortium that is taking up this research. So we are talking about Austria, two separate regions in Belgium, Brussels and Flanders, Norway, Romania, Slovak Republic, Slovenia, Sweden, the Netherlands, Italy, and Portugal. These are the countries where this kind of piloting project has focused in order to take stock of what is available and what we have to take into account in proposing a monitoring system. Which are the sectors that we selected? The sectors where we see the impact. It is based on a value chain approach of our methodology, for which you can see more details in a report that is going to be published in the next weeks. So we look into sectors like archaeology, architecture and construction, main sectors, museum, libraries and archives, real estate, tourism, to measure consumption of cultural heritage, insurance and ICT services as an auxiliary type of sectors, and we also have a first look into public expenditure and volunteering to the extent that data is available on that. The steps that we take after we have defined the sectors. For each sector, we have different types of measurements, but for all, we have measurements on employment, turnover, and gross value added. Then for each sector, we will need to use proxies in order to measure the different impacts. What are the steps that we take in the measurements? First, we have to map the population. To collect the data on economic sectors for different countries, we need sometimes to follow different approaches. To try to isolate the impact of cultural heritage, and at the end to develop, based on this experience, to develop or to propose a monitoring system. When should you expect things and what is the timeline? This project started in the spring of 2018, this year. We set up during the summer and early spring the theoretical framework that is based on a value chain approach on how to measure in the different sectors the impacts. Then during this period of the autumn until today that we're talking, doing the data collection, having an interim report already. The data analysis is going to follow in December, January, February, and we should expect to be ready with a final report that will propose that will include our proposition for a monitoring system in February 2019. It will take around 2 months to finalize it, and I guess that by May you will probably have access to all the material that we will have collected there and all the propositions. So if you have any questions, it's not only me working on this project, but it's easier if you address any questions to me. But of course, I know that there may be questions already today. Thank you.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Our next presenter is Sue Kidd from the University of Liverpool in the UK. Who's talking about maritime spatial planning and land-sea interactions from the ESPON MSP LSI project. Sue, over to you.
Well, it's very nice to be here and talking to you today, and I hope that my presentation will expand your horizons a little, because I'm talking about this project, Maritime Spatial Planning and Land-Sea Interactions, and it's one of the beginning of ESPON stepping into the sea. And I think it's important to recognise that Europe doesn't just involve the land. For some countries, and the UK is an example, the majority of their territorial area is sea. So in the UK's case, 80% of our territorial area is sea. And so I think that this is something that will develop over the years as an increasing feature of ESPON activity. So what I want to explain today is something about the context for the study. I want to share with you some of our approaches that we are developing to begin to understand land-sea interactions, and then to end with the beginnings of our findings and some of the early findings in relation to how do we actually think about land-sea interactions in practice. So some of you, including some in the room who are involved in it, may have picked up on the ESTADOR project. This is the European Seas Territorial Development Opportunities and Risks. And this was a project that was the first major attempt by ESPON to begin to think about the sea and its relationship with the land. And one of the major challenges in that project is how do we integrate sea-based data and land-based data in a consistent way, which is such a feature of ESPON. But our project now is not ESTADOR 2, so it has quite a different emphasis. And the starting point for our work is the MSP directive, which some of you may be aware of, which was introduced in 2014. And not only does this require member states with a coastline to establish marine spatial plans by 2021, but it also has a specific requirement for marine spatial planning, or for authorities in general, to consider land-sea interactions with the aim, in line with the integrated maritime policy of the EU, to develop integrated visions across the land-sea divide. So this is the base for our work. Now, the objectives, the overall aim is to try and think about how do we produce a comparable and consistent way of thinking about land-sea interactions across European space. So we start by defining what land-sea interactions are and how we might operationalize consideration of those. Our particular focus is the impacts of, on land of maritime activities. So this project is much more land-focused than perhaps the ESTADOR project was. Looking at existing practices for managing land-sea interactions, and ultimately the aim is to come up with guidelines on good management of LSI in territorial planning. So I think it's important to sort of outline to you and maybe encourage you to also expand your sort of visions of territorial planning, is that territorial planning includes both terrestrial planning but also marine spatial planning. And in the intersection of those, what we're trying to seek to do is identify critical issues related to land-sea interaction. And what we're trying to develop are guidelines that relate to a sort of comparable method of considering these, but in a place-sensitive way. So the core of our approach is to develop a method which includes particular emphasis on understanding maritime activities and their relationship to the land, look at management practices, to experiment with data and mapping. And all that work is centred around 5 case study areas, and we'll produce guidelines. So the case studies range in scale. So from areas like Gdansk Bay and the Slovenian coastline, which is actually very short, right the way up to a case study that is looking at the Netherlands as a whole. And what we are experimenting with is how do you actually drill down into the complexity of land-sea interactions. And we're doing that by looking at particular focal sectors in each of the case studies. So how do we begin to think about land-sea interactions? And land-sea interactions include socio-economic activities, there are environmental dimensions to them, but there's also important governance arrangements. And amongst all that, we are trying to identify some key issues that perhaps are a starting point for this type of analysis. So governance includes both marine planning as it's emerging, but also terrestrial planning. How far to date does it really address these issues? In terms of the socio-economic activities, we are, this work is being led by Ecoris, who have developed for the European Commission many reports on blue growth, and we're using their value chain analysis that they have developed, which is looking at key sectors, their backward linkages, their forward linkages, and trying to develop a spatialization of that value chain. We're not particularly going into ecological connections, but I think it's suffice to say we can't avoid this, because the more I have got to understand about this, the more I realise that many, if not most, of the ecological damage that is being caused to the sea actually comes from the land in all sorts of different ways. So, just to share with you some of our sort of conclusions or some emerging findings, what we are trying to produce are some maps to show the spatial extent of these value chains associated with critical sectors such as maritime transport. And I think the key point we're making here is that this isn't a subject that is just focused on the coastal zone. It is something that connects all of Europe. 80% of everything we touch and eat comes by sea. So the sea is very significant. So these are just some very early examples of the maps. Our focus is very much on connecting to spatial planning, both land and sea. And I think one of the things that comes out of that, so we're asked to think about, well, what can spatial planning do? And what we're identifying is that obviously it's part of a wider policy framework that relates to land-sea interactions. It has, both of those activities have important spatial management activities associated with them. But I think what is emerging quite strongly is they have a major role to play in good governance of land-sea interactions. They are the focal point for discussions about complex issues that extend well beyond spatial planning in terms of how you might influence them. But they perhaps are a critical place where those discussions can take place. So the guidelines we are trying to make as user-friendly as possible. This is some ideas about what they might look like. And I think the key point that comes out from many of the presentations today is that the case studies, we hope, will provide little narratives about particular forms of land sea interaction in particular places at different scales. And it will be those narratives that will perhaps encourage others to engage with this subject. So in terms of next steps, we've gone a very fast time frame, as many of the other projects. We've got our final report in May. And I think the key next step for us are a series of workshops in each of the case study areas that will mainly take place in January and February. So thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed, Sue. Our next speaker is Helka Kalliomäki, who's from the University of Turku in Finland, who is talking about the potential of big data for integrated territorial policy development in European growth corridors, the ESPON Big Data and EGC project. So Helka, over to you.
Thank you. Hi everyone. So I'm going to briefly present the targeted analysis project that is still ongoing, and we are quite in the middle of the work now. So the project name is Potentials of Big Data for Integrated Territorial Policy Development in the European Growth Corridors. And as I said, we are in the middle of the project. We are working with Tartu University. So there's two universities, Turku and Tartu universities, and then we have 3 stakeholders. The lead stakeholder is the Regional Council of Southwest Finland, and there's 1 ministry from Estonia and 1 region from Sweden, so quite a Nordic or Baltic approach in the project. Basically, in the background, there's really this really concrete and practical need to use new kind of evidence to support territorial policy making. So basically, finding new kinds of data sets to support policy making, and also to understand the functionalities and the connectivities between actors and regions in the growth corridors. So, and at the same time, there are increasingly these new data analysis products and services available, but there are quite many people in the public sector organizations at different scales who basically they have some kind of understanding that there is a lot of stuff available and coming, but still not that much knowledge and understanding yet what to actually do with those new tools and data sets. So that's really the practical issue there. So in the project, really we aim to introduce this comprehensive, maybe framework is a better word, for identifying already existing or new big data sources that might be relevant for policy making in the growth corridors. And really the main interest is on those kind of data sets that could be somehow used to better understand the functionality. So basically the interactions and the flows along the corridor. So what is going on between the actors and the regions. And of course, this is related to cross-border areas as well that have been discussed earlier. So really the aim is to strengthen the knowledge base for evidence-based planning, and the case studies that we are doing are mostly related to the area of Northern Growth Zone, that is basically a corridor, a strategic collaboration area running from Oslo via Stockholm and via Turku and Helsinki all the way to St. Petersburg. So, and there's a collaboration with the Tartu, the corridor running from other directions. So that's our framework, our geographical framework in the project. And the second objective is to find and evaluate new available data sources. So when I'm talking about growth corridors, basically I'm talking about these strategic collaboration areas that mostly follow the EU10T network. And as I said earlier, our project now is focusing on the corridors in the Sweden, Finland, and Estonia. the conceptual approach behind the project relates to this conceptualization of corridors as meta-governance frameworks for spatial development, and also related to soft planning that Andreas was talking about yesterday. So basically, the idea of corridors as a meta-governance framework includes the idea that basically corridors bring together different sectors of policy making as well as different scales of policy making, and then it is also related to the different geographical conceptualizations of space that were also discussed yesterday. On the other hand, there are issues related to physical space and territorial, and really this container-like understandings of space. But on the other hand, we are talking about digital connectivities and social interactions in the area. So the idea here is really that we need to take a comprehensive approach here to understand the potentials of different kinds of data to support the policy making. So within these different categories, we have then selected case studies to explore the possibilities related to different kinds of data sets. Traditionally, the focus on corridor planning has been mostly on the physical connectivity of actors. So physical transportation flows mostly related to the movement of people and the movement of goods. So, but there are increasingly these new data sets available that also describe the digital and social interactions, and definitely we see that there's a potential there to generate new forms of insights about spatial connectivities there. What we are doing now is basically we're doing the case study, so we are quite in the middle. First we identify the policy needs of the stakeholders that are mostly related to the three different sectoral areas, so transportation planning, land use planning, and spatial planning, and then economic development. So now we are trying to map and identify different data sources, particularly in those three sectors. And then in addition to the case studies, what we are doing, we are trying to identify also other kinds of data sources and somehow categorize those data sets. And we have, as I said, we have case studies. We have 3 different case studies plus a hackathon that is coming with the students from the Turku and Tartu universities in January, where we are also working with students to explore the possibilities related to these new data sets. The first case study is related to traffic measurement data that is opened by the Finnish Transportation Agency, I think it was last year. So we are analyzing the potentials related to that data sets, and it's mostly related to transportation planning, but there is also there are connections to other areas as well. And in the hackathon, the data is from Finland, but in the hackathon we are also exploring the possibilities to combine the Finnish data with the Swedish data, because the similar kind of data is also available from the Sweden side. So that's still something that we are going to explore in January. Then there's a case study in Estonia where we are analyzing the potentials related to mobile positioning data. There's a team in Tartu University. They have been doing research a long time already related to this kind of data. So that's definitely going to be interesting, and they are going to they are already working closely with the ministry there to explore the possibilities to combine this kind of new, more real-time data to the transportation planning at the national scale. And then there's one more case study related to social network analysis. So we are looking at the potentials related to project network data. So basically we have the network data from different EU projects in the area where we are looking at the connections between people in the EU-funded project. So that's a totally different kind of case study. And of course, then we have to think about what kind of information could we and knowledge could we get from that kind of analysis to support the planning and development practices at the regional scale mostly. So then we are going to present good practices and of course then policy lessons. That is something we are still working with at the moment. But definitely to sum up, see that that portraying these European growth corridors as frameworks for meta-governing spatial development really highlights the role of new kind of evidence to support that kind of planning processes and policy making. And definitely big data plays a central role in understanding these new connectivities and complex spatial relations there. That really cannot be captured by using traditional statistical data. So we see that the existing gaps in the knowledge base, they could be significantly complemented by utilizing these new data sources. And it really seems that nowadays the arguments about the functional corridors, they are too often based on these assumptions of connectivities and strategic objectives without really adequate evidence base. So the presented framework in the project then can be utilized to shed light on the different dimensions of corridor development to enhance their comprehensive governance. And also the different aspects related to spatial aspects related to corridor development, they also imply really different strategies for data collection, and that is something we are trying to now somehow capture in the project. Thank you.
Right, excellent, thank you very much. Our next presenter is Jason Begley from Coventry University in the UK on improving urban-rural connectivity in non-metropolitan regions, the ESPON URRUC project. Jason, over to you.
So hello, it's my first time working with ESPON, so quite exciting, but I do feel a bit of a fraud sitting in the comfy chair on stage. So I'm the lead coordinator for the UK on the urban-rural connectivity in non-metropolitan regions, or ERC, as we've nominally called it. I apologize for the acronym, it's totally my fault, it's absolutely terrible. There we go, wrong button. So I'm going to briefly talk it today and just summarize what we're doing in the project. So it started in June of 2018, so it's about 6 months into the project at this point in time. It was motivated by the stakeholders' needs to improve transport connectivity and accessibility, in remote and comparatively underdeveloped non-metropolitan regions. And the rationale behind that is that new regional economics is largely built around reductions in transport costs. And the decline in costs over the last century in particular has been central to economic growth and success, allowing regions and territories to embed more firmly in regional, national and global economies, offering access in particular to key services and opportunities for employment. So by improving accessibility connectivity in these areas, what we're aiming then to do is reduce deficiencies in comparatively underdeveloped locations, in particular in terms of urban-rural connectivity. So what are the aims and objectives of the project? Well, to contribute to improving transport policy and transport systems related to urban-rural connectivity in 4 non-metropolitan areas, which are broadly Scarborough Borough in the UK, where Coventry University have a campus, which is why we were requested to get involved in this particular project on behalf of the stakeholders. Marina Alta in Spain, Regione Liguria in Italy, or Vallarassia more specifically within that region, and then Västerbotten County in Sweden. So all four are broadly coastal territories with common issues related to remoteness and accessibility, very similar transport flows from underpopulated or rural areas into more concentrated populated centres, particularly along coastal areas, but again, not connected to large metropolitan centres, which would have given them greater opportunities for development. This project then will improve urban and rural mobility from these sort of underdeveloped rural areas into the more concentrated urban centres through knowledge transfer activities, so a range of activities based around understanding what the stakeholders' needs are, looking at the European literature and recommendations around that, and then making recommendations on improving transport infrastructure and integrated transport policies in these areas, and then further taking those recommendations and applying them to similar or comparable non-metropolitan areas across the EU. And again, as I say, the learnings will prove applicable then to other comparable non-metropolitan areas. So why urban-rural connectivity? So the metro regions are urban areas of more than 250,000 inhabitants, and the groupings that we're looking at here in the territories are actually below that level, are about NUTS 3, Lao 1. And what we're focusing on then is non-metropolitan regions, which are actually more definable by not being metropolitan regions than anything else. So they are areas of less than 250,000 in terms of classification, and not attached to these metropolitan areas. And what you largely find is that there are significant differences in development compared to metropolitan compared to non-metropolitan areas. Just to give you an example, when you look at, say, firm composition in these particular territories, they are notably different, largely based around supplying the needs of the locality or taking advantage of a resource in an area. You don't tend to see these larger traded companies operating. And so by improving transport accessibility and connectivity, you'd hope to improve these opportunities and improve access to these areas and encourage then the sort of movement of goods and services away from metropolitan into these non-metropolitan areas. So these urban-rural interactions represent a range of increasingly interconnected community types, and it's the urban-rural as component of it that is specific to this project. And what we're seeing then in the literature itself is a growing emphasis on developing these linkages, and there's a whole range of literature, not least of which is the Europe 2020 strategy. So the lens through which we're examining these urban-rural linkages are economic, spatial, and governance, and each of the partners involved have specific skill sets, as I'll come on to in a moment, that help us understand these sort of drivers that help develop these urban-rural areas. And I did want to sort of make one point here as we look at the urban areas and the interaction with rural areas. There's a tendency to think of movement from rural to urban to take advantage of services and take advantage of employment opportunities. But increasingly what we're seeing is a degree of counter-urbanization, a movement from urban areas into rural areas to take advantage of leisure activities, what's perceived as improved living lifestyles, a sort of a green economy as well as beginning to increasingly locate in rural areas. And we want to improve and encourage these kind of back and forward movement of goods and services. So what methodology are we using? We were inspired by the PER project, I think it's 2013, the potential for rural regions. And they took broadly speaking, a top-down, bottom-up perspective. So we adopted that methodology and took a 4-step plan. So first of all, we're contextualizing rural-urban relations using the European literature and other academic literature. The next step then is the regional context, getting the stakeholders' perspective. So we've been identifying a range of stakeholders and engaging in discussions with them, structured interviews, workshops, and so forth to try and get their perspective. Very early sort of findings at this stage, but I'll mention them in a moment. Thereafter, we'll then assess the region's urban-rural transport needs, and we'll create 4 case studies tailored to each of the 4 regions, but we'll then take the comparable components from each of these studies and make recommendations accordingly. So what are the outputs? Well, I just put up the work packages here to explain how we've been developing the project so far. We've had about 6 months. Work packages 2.1 and 2.2 are now complete. I don't really have findings from these because 2.1 was about setting the frameworks for the project and 2.2 was about understanding urban-rural linkages in these particular areas. We're at stage 2.3 and we've had some very interesting discussions already with the stakeholders. One of the most common repeated findings that we've found is their sense of lack of priority, that they're not prioritized as a local authority in particular when it comes to the flow of funding from national to regional actors, as it were. So again, they increasingly emphasize the need to be taken seriously at a regional and national level in terms of what they're trying to develop for their infrastructure. And I think one of the strongest quotes we've had so far was from the lead stakeholder, which is Scarborough, who said, we have to try and move 7 million people annually in a sort of a tourist season with an infrastructure designed for 110,000 people. And I think that's quite a powerful message to try and bring back to different levels of authority. And again, it's something to consider at a federal level as well. The later stages of the project are going to be developed by different members of the team, and this is the team, so obviously we're being coordinated by ESPON. We are the lead coordinators, Coventry University. We are located, we have a campus in Scarborough, as I mentioned already, which is why we began to develop these relations with the stakeholders. And when they came to us and said, we have a particular project we'd like to pursue, we said, very keen to get involved. We're also involved with Nordregio in Sweden, who are our sort of mapping and GIS experts. Politecnico di Torino in Italy, who are supporting us in terms of governance and understanding how it impacts on the transport policies. And then finally, University of Valencia in Spain, who are going to give us that sort of overarching European perspective on the later stages of the project. So what's the timeline? So I brought the Gantt chart with us. We've delivered the inception report and the interim report at this stage. We've had 2 meetings. I would just like to say that the best laid plans of men and mice do not survive contact with the enemy. We've already changed the meeting venue for the 3rd meeting, which is no longer in Västerbotten. It's now Marina Alta, Spain. We switched the 2 around because nobody wanted to go to Sweden in January because everyone's afraid of the snow. Yeah, that's the kind of transport problems we have to deal with. So that's just a short summary of the project. So thank you for your attention.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Jason. And last but definitely not least is Lauren Frederis from ESPON EGGC, rounding up the forthcoming ESPON research. Lauren.
Thank you, and good morning. So you heard from the 4 targeted analyses that we kicked off this year. What I would like to do now is just to give you a bit of a flavor for the 3 new activities that we will be kicking off now in December and in January. So the first one is on European sustainable urbanization through port city regeneration. So the objective here is really to look at what is the potential regional impact of port city regeneration as a driver for sustainable urbanization, growth, and resilience, and to provide municipalities with a better understanding of the tools and instruments that they can use to enable, inspire, and facilitate the implementation of sustainable port city regeneration. So the stakeholder consortium is led by Cork City Council, and we'll be looking at questions like how are cities impacted by the relocation of port services? How does brownfield regeneration also impact on the identity of the city and the wider region? How do we implement city visions for regenerating docklands districts? And also, how can we engage citizens more actively in these regeneration processes? The second activity we'll kick off will look at adapting European cities to population aging. So this is looking at how we can really develop more age-friendly cities and thinking about what kind of concrete initiatives can be put in place to adapt our cities to aging populations. So it's very much about quality of life for older people in urban environments. The consortium here is led by the Manchester Greater Authorities and includes a wide range of cities with different experiences across Europe. So we're looking at questions here like how are older people using their urban living environments, what kind of relationships are they developing between generations, and how is this supported by the cities? How are cities responding to population ages, and what kind of concrete strategies and initiatives are they putting in place? Then the third one that we will kick off is looking at urban circular collaborative economy initiatives. This is also known perhaps more commonly as the sharing economy. And here we are supporting the Urban Circular Economy Partnership. The consortium is led by the city of The Hague. And it's really looking at developing an understanding of how local, national, and EU policies can best enable these urban circular collaborative economy initiatives. So we're looking at questions like what are the different typologies of initiatives to really understand what is happening, what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats of those initiatives on the territories in question, and also what kind of multi-level policy strategies and instruments play a role in mitigating the negative effects that are actual and also perceived in those cities, and what are the positive impacts that can be potentially reinforced. So those are the three activities that will kick off now in December and in January. I think three very diverse topics that will provide new insights on how cities and regions are dealing with the economic, social, and environmental transformation that we're facing. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Right, so while our speakers have been presenting, a number of questions have come in the Slido app, so thank you very much indeed for those of you who've been posing those questions. The top two ranked questions are both to Helke, so I'm going to ask those first, and then I'm going to come to Elisabeth and to Sue. So Helke, if you can have a go at the top two questions there. Will the big data project also address cross-border interactions? And what is the status quo on using mobile positioning data for analyzing mobility in cross-border areas? And that might be fractionally outside of the scope of this project. Anyway, if you could have a go at those two, and then I'll come to the further questions. It will turn on. Yeah, they'll put it on. Just carry on. Take mine.
Okay, yeah. So first about the cross-border interactions, how we are going to address those. So even though we have case studies dealing with data sets from mostly from one national context, we are also in one case study looking at the cross-border dimensions that's related to the social network analysis case, and then the hackathon that we organize in January will be more directly related to this challenge of cross-border interactions and what kind of data can be utilized there. So, but definitely that is a challenge that we have faced when we have been trying to think about the content of the case studies, because, for example, we wanted to have a case study where we've utilized social media data, but it's not that simple when you cross borders. For example, there's one company in Finland that has a good database about different social media sources, but it's again a Finnish data set. So definitely there have been challenges there, but the hackathon will address those issues, and we have different data sets there where we are going to see the potentials and challenges. Then there was the question related to mobile positioning data. So maybe I'm not the best person to answer. The Tartu team is an expert in these issues, but definitely we are going to be elaborating on that based on the case study that is mostly focused on Estonia due to the different limitations and legislative environment in different countries, but the case study is basically based in Estonia, but we are going to be then thinking about the possibilities to combine that data with the data in other countries. So yeah, we will address that in the project.
Excellent, thank you very much. I'm next going to come to a question to Sue, which was, if we can get that one up on the screen, can the framework and the outcomes of the MSP LSI be applied in order to enhance cooperation between member and non-EU member states, for example, in the Mediterranean area? That's now the one that's highlighted at the top there. If you could have a go at answering that one. It should go on automatically if the battery is still fine. Carry on talking. No, it's not.
That's better, I think, isn't it? Yeah. Yes, I think there is no reason why the guidelines that we're producing couldn't be applied in any coastal state. I think there's nothing specific in what we are doing that would apply only to Europe, I think. There obviously the directive and this requirement to consider land-sea interactions is something that is guiding European member states, but the guidelines are not specific to Europe. So yes, I think they could apply, and I think one of the ambitions is to allow to provide people with some sort of comparable method that would enable them to have conversations across borders. But I think what we're realizing, it's come up in several of the conversations, is that obviously the data that we will use to begin to understand land-sea interactions is very country-specific, very place-specific. The guidelines will need to be applied in a sensitive way in every locality. So the answer is yes to that.
Right, okay. Right, excellent, thank you very much. If you can just pass the microphone on to Elisabeth. I've just lost the question, here we go. So, which methodology was applied to measure the impact of material cultural heritage on regional development? Is the question for you?
Yeah, so here we're talking about data collection on different regions where we have different definitions applied. So there were two challenges in applying the methodology. As mentioned in the presentation, the one challenge was how are we going to define when we are going to talk about different definitions per country. So we had to operationalize it as explained in one of the slides. The general methodology was a value chain approach, an approach that talks about creation, sustainable management, dissemination, exhibition, consumption, and also auxiliary activities like ICT, for example, or insurance. So we follow this approach, and there we try to identify the indicators that we could collect in each step of this approach in order to collect the data that is possible to collect at this point.
Right, excellent, thank you very much. Now a question, the third one that's on the screen there, to Jason. Does URRUC apply green infrastructure as complementing a balancing measure and taking that into account? And if not, how can that be done?
Is that working?
Yep.
So first of all, very good question. It's actually surprisingly difficult. We incorporated components of the green economy and components of low carbon vehicles and electric vehicles as well into the actual project itself. But when we met with the stakeholders, they were surprisingly keen on more traditional modes of transport. So we had that discussion with them. Mostly they seemed interested in encouraging people to build more roads. I'm not sure why that was the case. I think it was a field of dreams attitude. But when we spoke to, so our intention was to encourage a number of providers of low carbon vehicle car shares, bike shares to locate in the various areas. When we spoke to them alongside the stakeholders, the immediate response was the population centres are almost too small to set up a viable car share unit, and it would require significant support and subsidies from either regional or national government. And when we spoke to the stakeholders and said, can we put in, say, for example, a bike share scheme to discourage transport, fossil fuel transport and encourage new forms of mobility across the the territory, their immediate response was, have you seen how hilly it is? You're not going to cycle a bike up and down those. And we went back to the bike share company and said, can you get electric bikes? And they said, that's 4 times more expensive or 5 times more expensive. So there are significant challenges in incorporating green transport solutions in these particular territories, and we have to be more imaginative about the solutions that we offer. What we're keen to do is encourage greater uptake of public transport and, in the longer term, encourage all stakeholders involved to greenify, that's a word I've just made up, to greenify their own transport systems and encourage more hybrid activity in terms of buses, which are becoming online and more available, but also in terms of vehicles that are moving back and forward from key industrial areas within the territory into the urban centre. So we're also meeting with various transport companies operating within the territory to see what their plans are for the climate change and the economic, the challenges in terms of carbon reduction of their own transport fleets. And I hope that's comprehensive enough answer for you. Thank you.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much. There is. Oh.
Sorry to interrupt, this was my question, and the answer was interesting, but it was not about green infrastructure, because this is something different. It's a concept of connecting areas, protected and non-protected green areas, since it's about transport and mobility, the question would be, if you develop new routes of transport, how can the connection between green areas be restored or even made better alongside your project?
So sorry, I slightly misunderstood your question. There are problems with that. For example, in the delete stakeholders territory, there is a major national park, and if you improve connectivity to the villages that are located around that national park, the immediate impact is tourism increases, maximizing capacity, and so there's a balance that that has to be taken, that if you improve transport linkages into these areas, the result is actually going to be people outside the territory that are going to benefit. So we are discussing with the stakeholder whether or not they can put in some form of charge or some form of taxation on travellers from outside the area coming in to make use of these amenities, to then use that money to improve that connectivity. So if you're travelling to a national park, you might incur an expense which will then be later on reinvested back into the infrastructure. And considering 7 million people move through the territory on an annual basis, it might provide a reasonable sum of money specifically for those purposes. And again, a part of the Coventry team, one of the members of the Coventry team is giving a look at that and seeing what's available in the literature to recommend to the stakeholders, and I hope that makes sense.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. There is no question directed only to Laurent, but therefore, Laurent, if I could ask you to have a go at the point, the second question there on the screen. Also bear in mind that the question is addressed to me. Thank you very much for having asked that. I believe all the presentations will be uploaded on the ESPON website. Maybe, Laurent, you might know the answer to that one as well, because I don't know the answer to that. So if you could have a go at the top two that are on the screen there, I'd be grateful.
Well, I think the first one's very easy. I think the answer is yes.
Right, good.
So I think absolutely. I think that the answer to the second question is also yes. I think all these projects that we've just heard from now are an opportunity to listen to the local citizens. And I think this also goes for the activities that we will launch in the next 2 months. I think they address key challenges that cities and regions face with the ongoing transformations, whether we're talking about mobility, the environment, demographic changes, economic changes. And of course, this involves the local population and the local citizens. So I think also as ESPON, we see this very much as an opportunity to be in listening mode. So it's, of course, the targeted analyses are designed in a way to serve the stakeholders. So there's always a lead stakeholder and a stakeholder consortium. So it's about them framing their policy challenges. But of course, in the process of coming up with evidence and results and recommendation, it's important to also listen to the local population. So I think the answer is yes.
Right, excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I think that draws that panel to a close, so give them all a warm round of applause. Thank you very much indeed to all of you. We now need to make a swift change of panel up here at the front, so if I could ask those of you on the panel at the moment to take your leave, and then I'd like to invite up onto the panel Timo Esser from the ESPON Managing Authority in Luxembourg and Ilona Rauxer, the Director of ESPON. If both of you could come up onto the stage, I would be grateful.
Yes, welcome also from my side. We normally have a session at that time of the seminar where we inform a bit about how the program is developing. And this time I would like to focus on the midterm evaluation. I would like to take you through the scope of the midterm evaluation, where we stand in terms of timing, methodology, and main preliminary messages. This should be kept in mind as we have received, and the monitoring committee has received the draft final report just a week ago, and there was a first discussion in the monitoring committee. There was also the request, after we had a look into the paper, to deepen certain aspects. We are also working still on the recommendations which come out of this evaluation, so that you are aware that this is a work in progress, but nevertheless we would like to take the opportunity to share with you some of the messages which came out so far. Scope of the midterm evaluation, this is about the performance of the program to date. We are now in the mid of the implementation of the program. We would like to draw some recommendations for now, for the second part of the program, but as well also on the future program. I can also tell you that in that context that the monitoring committee was setting up a joint working group who explores now the possibilities for orientation for a future program, as ESPON is part of the ETC regulation, European Territorial Cooperation Regulation, under the Component 5, for those who have had a look into the proposed regulation of the Commission. And then we would also like to understand a bit the changes, how it took off in the changes we introduced after the 2013 program into the 2020 program. So the topics are to examine the objective, output, and results, the quality, the policy relevance, but also the architecture of the program, the involvement of the monitoring committee, appropriateness of administrative architecture and procedures, the allocation of resources. And for us, from the management side, it's also important to have a review of the indicators which came with the program. Now, in my presentation, I would rather, I decided to keep these more technical parts about EGTC-MA relations out and focus regarding the administrative architecture and procedures on that parts which are more related to the involvement, the tendering of projects, and these kind of aspects where most of you are concerned with. So timing, we had online surveys, and I suppose that most of you received questionnaires over the summer. In addition, we had in-depth interviews with the stakeholders. We had case studies on 4 projects, and also uptake stories to understand more in depth how actually we come from the evidence to the use of the ESPON results. And There was also consultation with the managers of ESIF, European Structural Investment Fund managers, because there is also a particular focus in that programming period to understand the uptake, how this material can be used for the programming. And there will be also an emphasis now in the next year to inform operational programs, managing authorities to use the material for the programming of the next programming period. So timing, it was launched in March 2018, last year. We had an interim report discussed in June at the MC, and a draft final report, as I said, now just last week, which was discussed then in the last, on Monday, Tuesday in the monitoring committee, and we are discussing then the results and possible recommendations at the next monitoring committee in March 2019. So, some of the messages, the issues which have been addressed was the quality of research, and it was concluded that in principle ESPON provides a clear European added value in the following ways. That the territorial evidence which is produced is in complementarity with national and regional research activities, and it has also a kind of uniqueness in the territorial knowledge which is developed and not offered by other research organizations. And in principle, in general, project outputs are considered to be of a high scientific quality with relevant results, also delivered on time. And one of the questions which was also important for us to understand better was the question of the use of service contracts instead of subsidy contracts, because that was expected to bring some efficiency, particularly regarding the reporting, to reduce the burden. And here we could see that the service contracts had helped to broaden the supply also of service providers, that others who were not in the position to participate are now also competing to provide services to the ESPON. Regarding the terms of reference, they are considered to be well focused, but that was a message which we received, is that sometimes the deliveries are not fully realistic, the expected deliveries. I think in particular for those projects which run only 1 year, where a number of reports are expected to be present. And then another issue which was raised was then that there are greater constraints on academic creativity because the terms of reference are in a more more narrow way, defining the deliveries which are expected. But there it's also then a way to discuss how this can be actually kept by leaving more space for methodologies to be applied. Then the policy relevance, the observation here is that ESPON is perceived generally to be policy relevant and to add to the knowledge of the policymakers, and that the process for selecting project topics reflects the stakeholder demand for territorial evidence. I mean, here we see a lot of positive feedback on the targeted analysis, and this is highly appreciated. We still have challenges what concerns the geographical scale of the analysis. Of course, when we start from EU level data observation, then to break it down to regional and local is a challenge. The possibility of differentiated policy, of different policy levels to absorb the material. I think yesterday the discussion showed that quite openly, that on the one side we have rather complex material, which is interesting, which is also inspiring in a way, but to then draw out the policy messages in a way that it's also understood on the regional and local level is not so easy. And this will come up. I mean, we will see later that the uptake, especially on the regional and local level, is lower in comparison to the national and European level. So, and it's also fair to say that the preparedness of potential users to engage with the material is not always there. And there we can also have to discuss how we can actually improve this process. Public authorities may need to support, may need support to better engage with the ESPON 2020 products. I mean, whether there are ways to break it down to certain types of territories or specific issues, that is to be discussed. And I was mentioning it already regarding the target groups of the program. We can see that EU and national authorities claim to use the ESPON material more frequently than regional and local authorities. And there might be a necessity to target outreach activities in order to ensure better buy-in, as our evaluators called it, of potential key users. What that means in practice, we have to discuss also with the MC and also with the ECPs. Results and tools and outputs could be further differentiated and tailored to cover more aspects of policy development and impacts that are relevant to the needs of the target groups. And hence stakeholder involvement in the design of ESPON projects may also help to adapt to the target group's needs or the outputs. And we have still to look further on the outreach activities to help public authorities at the local and regional level in particular to better engage with ESPON outputs. As I said before, I mean, the ambition was in the program to come to the regional level and local level as well, and apparently here we have quite a shortcoming. Also regarding the management authorities of other programs, the involvement, the uptake on that side is not at that level as we have expected it, or we were hoping that it would be the case. Then, I mean, target groups outreach is very strongly connected. Outreach has clearly improved to this program period in comparison to the last program period. That shows that most responses in general are fine with the material that was produced and the way of outreach activities, how it's conducted. However, there are also responses which are a bit less positive regarding the outreach material, that they feel that the quality of the research is not actually reaching then the outreach material. We have to further understand what that means. The tailoring of outreach to the needs of the stakeholders is not always sufficient. I mean, it looks like we need to have another debate how we can actually come from evidence, like inspiring people, as we say, but to the youth. And we have now, maybe just to share that with you, we have now also a discussion in the monitoring committee how this can be better linked. We have a discussion about what actually means knowledge. Do we have to turn our focus a bit, saying, okay, evidence is more information, and knowledge is also the way to understand how you can apply the evidence. So that this is, knowledge also includes skills, has to do with capacities and so on. And this is, I think, an important debate what we have to also to lead, and where we may also come back to you to get a feedback on this. For successful uptake of results, it seems to be crucial to use, to build on existing networks and associations across Europe to work with outreach activities. So they seem to also be important to have some experience and to get into the mode, and we can see that associations can help here. Also, alternative outreach solutions such as policy labs, combining then evidence with learning. This is another way how we may take another step in that direction in the future. So this is a kind of overview on what has been addressed. I mean, as I said, we still are in the way of understanding all the results and having some particular questions. In any case, the monitoring committee will receive the final report before the March meeting, and this will then also be online, and so you can have a look yourself. And I'm sure that then when we meet the next time in Romania in June, that we will have another discussion on that. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. And now, Ilona.
Good afternoon. So let me briefly present to you the progress of the implementation of the single operation and also some plans that we have agreed with the monitoring committee to be implemented in the course of 2019. In general terms, well, the single operation and its implementation is moving forward. This is the good news, and in principle, we can say that we are well on track in terms of achieving our results and objectives. So let me start with the applied research. We are currently finalizing procurement procedures in order to contract the service providers on 5 of the activities mentioned here, so on rural development, sustainable land use, technological transformation and transitioning of regional economies, as well as quality of life and territorial impacts of natural disasters. Then shortly we'll be also launching a competitive dialogue procedure, which is a special type of procurement procedure to contract eventually service providers for activities on interregional relations in Europe and also cultural heritage as a source of societal well-being in European regions. And we have also agreed on one additional, and this will be the final new applied research, the last new applied research activity to be launched in 2019. And with this one, we will reach the foreseen output of 22 applied research activities. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to reveal the subject yet, but please follow the information on the website. Once we will pre-announce it officially, you will get the information on this topic. It is agreed with the monitoring committee, but as you probably know, we have some sensitivities in relation to the public procurement procedure. But you will hear about it shortly. We also have a number of targeted analysis activities to be finalized in 2018. So it's on migration and refugees, networks of protected areas, Alps 2050, digital health and cross-border public services. After the last cut-off date of June this year, we have selected 3 new targeted analysis activities, stakeholder proposals that will now be implemented as targeted analysis activities. So one of them is related to economic sprawl, where Vienna city administration will be the lead stakeholder. The second one is on business development opportunities on external EU borders, where Latgale planning region from Latvia will be the lead stakeholder and is the lead stakeholder. And the third one is on carrying capacity methodology for tourism, where the lead stakeholder is the Ministry of Economic Development and Technology from Slovenia. And as always, in cooperation with our stakeholder consortiums, the lead stakeholders, we will be developing now the terms of reference in order to also launch these calls for selecting the service providers and contracting service providers early next year. Now, about our plans on targeted analysis in 2019, there will be 2 more cut-off dates next year. One is foreseen for the 25th of January next year. And here I would like you to note that according to our agreement with the Monitoring Committee, priority will be given to stakeholder proposals on policy implementation tools for integrated territorial development in relation to both national, regional or European funded programs. The second cut-off date will be set for June 2019. We have not yet defined the precise date, but this is the approximate time frame. And we have also agreed with the Monitoring Committee that in comparison to the original plan, where it was foreseen that we will select only 5 targeted analyses, we have decided to increase the number to 8. Considering that we see a very clear added value and also very good level of benefit to our stakeholders of this type of activities, and therefore the Monitoring Committee has accepted our proposal to select and implement more targeted analysis in the course of the following years. Now on the online tools, we have 3 online tools to be finalized until the end of this year, which is the TIA Territorial Impact Assessment web application, database portal, and also online map finder. We have 4 ongoing activities. One is related to European and macro-regional monitoring platform, another one in relation to the tool to analyze the developments at the scale of functional urban areas. And then we will be also launching calls to contract service providers for developing a tool to localize sustainable development goals, and also a tool for spatial comparisons. Our main publication of next year will be the State of the EU Territory Report, which will aim at supporting post-2020 programming at national, regional and local level, as well as aiming at territorial cooperation programs. At the same time, it will also support our stakeholders in the process of designing, developing the regional and local development strategies. We also aim at contributing to the discussion and to the development of the new next European Commission's cohesion report, as well as we believe this report can be also potentially beneficial and contribute to the debate on the urban agenda and territorial agenda post-2020. In terms of content, we will present the observations on the main territorial development trends in Europe and also offer practical advice to national, regional and local authorities and stakeholders for implementing and for designing and implementing their integrated territorial development strategies and EU-funded programs. This report will be launched and presented and discussed at an ESPON conference that is foreseen for autumn 2019. In the second half of this year, we also developed a new publication on ESPON's contributions to post-2020 ESIF programming, which is a catalogue of relevant past, ongoing and also initiated ESPON research that is designed to support post-2020 mainstream and ETC programming, and it is structured around 5 policy objectives of the Common Provisions Regulation, as well as the specific objectives presented in the ERDF, Cohesion Fund and ESF Plus draft regulations. and it is accordingly also divided into two main subsections. And this was meant to also serve as a guidance to our stakeholders in order not to get lost in the wealth of evidence and research that ESPON has, and to be able to help them to understand which ESPON's outputs can potentially be useful for the programming exercise. In the second half of this year, we have also developed one new policy brief on inner peripheries in Europe, and this is also published and available online. We hope you will find it useful. On the basis of the working papers that you have discussed today in the policy labs, we will prepare policy briefs on cross-border public services, migration, and green infrastructure. So you will see them published online in early next year. We have also agreed with the monitoring committee on the policy briefs that will be developed in the course of 2019. Two of them are proposed by the forthcoming presidencies of Romania and Finland. As you see, we will support the Romanian presidency with a policy brief on integrated place-based policies for declining cities, and we will support the Finnish presidency with a policy brief on digital urbanism, sustainable innovation in cities. And these policy briefs will be presented and discussed at the intergovernmental meetings that will be hosted and chaired by the respective presidencies. In addition to that, we will also develop, on the basis of the ESPON's research results, several policy briefs that will also synthesize the key messages coming out of our research activities and also present the policy advice for different governance levels on subjects of cross-border e-health, on the material cultural heritage, transport planning, and also green regional economies. Now, moving on to the events and our representation at the events. We have contributed to many different events. We have organized many events ourselves, and increasingly, of course, outreach is becoming the priority for the ESPON EGTC. This year we have also, as always, actively contributed to the European Week of Regions and Cities. We participated in 10 events and reached directly over 800 participants, and there was also a special event of the EGTCs where ESPON EGTC has received an honorable mention for its contribution and its work, which was also, of course, a pleasant and surprise for us. In November this year, we had a very interesting conference, a scientific conference of ESPON, Building the Next Generation of Research on Territorial Development, where we aimed at promoting the use of new methodologies and concepts developed to support the territorial dimension in policy development, and we had thematically a focus on methods and concepts that are able to capture territorial interrelations, that are able to monitor integrated territorial development, and also about new data sources and tools for territorial analysis, like, for example, big data. We received quite a large pool of papers from our scientific community, and also from the scientific network and organizations that have not yet cooperated with ESPON so far. I believe we had a very interesting and inspiring discussion, and all results will be, and papers will be presented in a scientific report that we are now finalizing, and that will be also published on the ESPON's website. And we believe that this also will serve as a good inspiration for both us and also hopefully for all of you in terms of developing new methodologies to capture all the territorial development realities in line with the concepts and to address all the challenges that we discussed yesterday, meaning trying to address the development and analyze the development beyond administrative borders at different functional geographical scales, and finding new ways how to capture the development using new We also had a special panel debate, and this was a panel debate with representatives of other European scientific organizations. We believe also that for ESPON it is increasingly important also to develop cooperation with these networks and to sustain cooperation with these networks to also understand the overall debates and where the research in this field is actually going. In the framework of transnational outreach, we had a very interesting conference in Athens on migration, which was co-organized with Interact, and that gathered over 100 participants, policymakers from Greece, Italy, and Spain, and we believe we have achieved also an excellent press coverage, and here you can see also that we had a press coverage by Athens News Agency, 17 online websites, also in one printed newspaper. Basically the results have been presented and the conference was reflected. In general terms, it is our goal and ambition, and we are making additional efforts in order to increase the visibility of the work of ESPON and to, as we say, get ESPON on the news. And we believe that we have already achieved good results, and many of the events to which we contributed that are have been organized by the Committee of the Regions, also by the European Parliament, have been reflected in the media, have been presented in the media, and also our contributions have been quite substantially also and importantly referenced in the different media outlets, which is we believe very good news for us in terms of our ambition to increase our visibility. We also are increasing our presence and activity on the social media, mainly on Twitter and LinkedIn. And we are implementing our social media strategy in 2 steps. Firstly, our ambition was and still is to increase the visibility of ESPON on social media, and we do that with your support, of course. In the second stage, we also aim at developing more interaction with the community, with the influencers, also to present more of ESPON results on social media, also to focus on videos, to increase our activity further, to make it more or less constant, permanent. And this is something that, of course, for us is a continuous effort to make sure that the key messages that ESPON delivers, they are visible and they are useful. And finally, there's also a list of ESPON's events for 2019. Here you can see only the ones that we will organize in the framework of the European outreach. So there will be an ESPON Interact joint workshop in the first quarter of next year on post-2020 programming to support the European Territorial Cooperation programs. We will have again 2 seminars in the framework of the presidency programs of Romania and Finland. There will be an ESPON conference on the State of EU Territory report, and we also will organize events that are tailor-made and are organized on demand of our stakeholders. These are peer learning workshops and also briefings to the members of the Committee of the Regions, because in line with what also Timo was presenting as the results of the midterm evaluation, it is indeed our ambition to reach much better and in a much more precise way local and regional stakeholders, both policymakers and politicians. And we believe that these peer learning workshops and also briefings to the members of the Committee of the Region can usefully serve this purpose. But this is not all in terms of events. We will also, as always, contribute to a large amount of external events to which we are usually invited, and we get an increasing amount of invitations to those. And at the same time, there will be a whole list of transnational outreach activities that I'm not listing now, but you will be able to check the calendar of those events on the ESPON's website. And we truly believe and also hope that you will find these events useful, inspiring, informative to your work, and also useful in terms of policy development. Finally, as also last year, this year we also have launched our annual survey, because it is important for us also in the framework of our annual survey to understand the usefulness of our results and the uptake of our results, and also your feedback on your participation in the different activities in the framework of the implementation of the single operation. So we encourage you to fill in this survey to make sure that we also have your views and your feedback on our work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Ilona. So could I possibly then just ask the representatives of the forthcoming Romanian and Finnish presidency, actually they're ESPON members from those countries, Radu Nexuliu and Hanna Maria Oyankangas, to come both up onto the stage, please. And also, perhaps also if Roland Abter from the Austrian Federal Ministry of Sustainability and Tourism could also take this opportunity to come and join us up on the stage, if he's here. Oh, the name tags don't necessarily match. If you just take a seat there, that's perfect. Roland seems to not be here just yet. So, in which case then, I will first of all give the floor to Radu for his remarks. Take that. But do you want to? Oh, you got slides. In which case, go over to the lectern. Thank you.
Thank you. So, with the pressure of the lunch break approaching, and in fact the end of the ESPON Seminar, it is my great honor to present you the future presidency. It was 10 years ago. I was in France, in Bordeaux, and it was my first ESPON Seminar I have attended. And I remember that I realized we will have to organize an ESPON Seminar in Romania. And then I said, when is that? It's in 2019. Okay, fine, it's far away. So now it's only 1 month away that we have to start the actual presidency, although I can say that the preparing activity has been as demanding as probably the actual activity will be. So let me just start. Our presidency has a mandate which is future-oriented, and our main aim is to advance the European agenda and to progress on all the topics that have been started by the previous presidencies. And my presentation will focus, of course, on the subjects that are of interest to ESPON, so the territorial cohesion and urban matters. But first of all, let me just briefly inform you about our logo and slogan. The logo is a symbol of the confidence that Romania is giving to young people. It has been chosen after a contest where only pupils and students could participate. And so the logo was designed by a 15-year-old that's to show our trust in the younger generations. And it indicates a moving and self-assured and dynamic European Union, but that is also attached to its values, because the logo represents a wolf, and it can also bridge to the attachment to the protection of biodiversity. And as for the slogan, cohesion, a common European value, it recalls the principle of unity, and of course everybody in the room is familiar with the significance of reducing the disparities, including the territorial disparities. So our priorities are grouped in 4 large themes, which are converging Europe, growth, cohesion, competitiveness, and connectivity. And then there's the Europe of safety. The third one is Europe, a stronger global actor, acting on security and defense policy and consistency of policy with the neighborhood. And then the Europe of common values. So I can say that we are both anxious and excited for the activities regarding the territorial and urban matters, and we are anxious because there's a lot of work coming in, and we are excited because I think that there has been good progress made by the previous presidencies, and we think that we can also, we are quite ambitious with our program. So first, I will speak about the territorial cohesion priorities. We are, of course, involved in the revising process of the EU territorial agenda, and you can see there that there's a new trio of presidencies, Romania, Finland, and Croatia, which will be complemented by Germany because the new territorial agenda, according to the calendar, will be approved during the German presidency. So during our presidency, we will have the first conclusions concerning the topics for the revised territorial agenda. And our focus will be on functional urban areas and on the relation between functional urban areas and areas in decline, and thus analyzing better the role of functional urban areas for territorial cohesion. As for the urban priorities, urban development priorities, first of all, we are very much committed to the implementation of urban agenda for the European Union. That's why we are lead partner for the Jobs and Skills Partnership together with the cities of Rotterdam and Jelgava. And during our presidency, we will support the process of implementing the urban agenda actions, and we will present the final outcomes of the Amsterdam partnerships and hopefully also approve the action plans of the Maltese partnerships. So we will present the first results of the urban agenda for the European Union. And it does not stop here. We also are engaged in continuing the work that has been done. We will start the partnerships that have been agreed during the Bulgarian presidency, the one concerning culture and cultural heritage, and the one concerning security in public space. And then we will also coordinate the discussion on the future of the European agenda for the European Union, Of course, it's also of much importance to ensure the link between the urban agenda and the territorial agenda renewal process. So we will continue to identify common themes and activities. And last but not least, we also will coordinate the discussion concerning the position of the member states in relation with the proposed financial framework for the post-2020 funding period. And I can say that all these priorities that have been presented will be included in a declaration adopted by the ministers in a ministerial informal meeting that will take place in Bucharest. But I will come back to that at the end of the calendar. So just briefly present you the calendar of events during our presidency related to territorial cohesion first. So the task force for the renewal of the Territorial Agenda 2020, which is composed by recent presidencies and future presidencies, and also with the participation of ESPON, of the European Commission, and the Committee of Regions. There will be 2 meetings during our presidency in order to elaborate on the topics to be amended and included in the territorial agenda post-2020, and to discuss possible pilot actions and so on. I will not insist too much on that. And then in March we will have the NTCCP meeting, which will also benefit from the ESPON inputs from projects such as the European Territorial Reference Framework and Compass. And there will be also an ESPON policy brief hopefully available by then to be discussed. So our intention is to collect the good practices as a basis for inspirational communication, and to explore the position related to the proposed territorial cohesion regulations. And this meeting will be followed in May by a meeting of the General Directors meeting on territorial cohesion, where we will further deepen these issues. And as for the urban agenda and meetings related to urban development, we will start with the meetings of the urban agenda technical preparatory group that will have almost the same composition as the task force for the territorial agenda renewal, only with Eurocities also involved. And we will debate the first draft of the Bucharest Declaration in the first meeting, and then we will discuss several other issues which will also be discussed during the Urban Development Group, which will take place in relation with the anti-CCP meeting. And there we will also coordinate the discussion on the implementation and current state of play of urban agenda, and we will also revive the discussion on the reference framework for sustainable cities. So then this will be followed by the Directors General meeting, which will take place on the 8th of May, and there we will have a third draft version of the Bucharest Declaration, and it's the same subjects that have already been presented during the previous meetings that will be further elaborated and coming to a final state so that the Bucharest Declaration can be approved during the informal ministerial meeting, which will take place on the 13th and the 14th of June in Bucharest. The main results will be also to launch the new partnerships of the urban agenda. And now, this was the structure from a thematic point of view, but this table shows better maybe the chronological order of the events. So just to say that I saved the best for last, if the ministries will not mind that I consider ESPON Seminar as important as a ministerial meeting. We will invite you to Iași, which is a vibrant and dynamic city, although it is in a quite poor development region, and it is in the extreme periphery of the European Union, maybe 10 kilometers away from the European Union border. On the 19th and the 20th of June, we will organize the ESPON Seminar. It will be preceded by the monitoring committee meeting, and then on the 20th and the 21st of June, there will be the ESPON contact point meeting. So that's it from my side. More about the Romanian presidency can be found on the special website designed. And thank you for your attention, and have a great lunch break.
Thank you very much indeed, Radu. We've had a bit of a move around the panel here, so you can just take a seat here. We'd be grateful. Thank you very much. So now I'm going to give the floor to Hanna Maria from the ESPON MC member from Finland.
Hello and good afternoon. As we are getting closer to our seminar and we have only a few minutes and presentations away from lunch, I'll be quite brief. But I'll start from looking back as well as Radu did in his presentation. I remember working in the Ministry of Interior in Finland in 2006 and assisting to organize ESPON meeting in Espoo back then. So I have to say that I feel a bit old. And back then I never thought I would be here, and I would be organizing another ESPON meeting and seminar in Finland. But anyhow, a few points on territorial cohesion, territorial agenda. We are, of course, we are very committed to revising the territorial agenda on our behalf, and of course we'll do our part and are very keen to work on this project. It's what comes to the agenda. It's important that we find strategic focus and narrative that are relevant and topical for the future of European territories. We would like to emphasize that the territorial agenda should be complementary to other EU strategies and not something that is not connected to them. Also, we need to find modern and concrete ways to implement the agenda. We should be able to engage actors on regional, local levels as well, and of course across other sectors. Thematically, digitalization is one of the key priorities during our presidency. We want to carry forward the work done by Estonia in this field during their presidency. What comes to urban matters, we would like to draw attention to digital innovations in urban environments. We are keen on how digital solutions can help to create sustainable and fluently working cities. And as Ilona mentioned in her presentation, ESPON has kindly included a policy brief on digital innovations in next year working plan, and we are really looking forward to this paper. The theme of digital innovations will build links to relevant thematic partnerships of the EU urban agenda in a cross-thematic manner. And these partnerships include partnerships on digital transition, urban mobility, energy transition, and circular economy. What comes to the events we will organize, we will host a Director General's meeting on cohesion policy and urban development and territorial cohesion in October. And finally, I would like to invite you all up to Helsinki for an ESPON week end of November next year. I hope I will see you all in Finland.
Excellent, thank you very much indeed. So next year to the opposite ends of Europe, to Iași and to Helsinki in the ESPON network. And so I'm now then to draw this seminar to a close. I'm first then going to give the floor to Roland Arbeter, who's an ESPON MC member and senior policy advisor of the Federal Ministry of Sustainability and Tourism here in Austria. So Roland, over to you.
Okay, final words on behalf of the co-organizer, which is the presidency and the MC chair. It will be no summary, no slides anymore, but nevertheless some things have to be said at the end. The first thing I would like to say is that the experience of the last 2 days confirmed the narrative of the ESPON seminars, so that the ESPON seminars are not only the flagship events of the ESPON program, bringing together the projects, the policymakers, and the interesting people, but it's also the place to be to follow the policy developments on territorial development, urban development, territorial cohesion. The place to be to get updated information. We had these strategic debates to form their own opinion, to get involved, to discuss. I think this was quite impressive the last 2 days. This is true for the EU, those who are working in the EU context, but the ESPON family is going beyond. We have the ESPON partners which are not members of the EU, even attract interest by other countries. I had in the break a very nice talk with Albanian colleagues, where they also are working on territorial cohesion following the EU example. So the second thing I want to say is thanks to all those who have contributed to the event, the keynote speakers, the speakers in the workshops, the discussion, and of course those who have organized on the ESPON EGTC and also on the Austrian side. I know that an ESPON seminar also means a lot of work, and we have experienced this during the event. So thanks for that. And last but not least for the moderator, John, for guiding us through. No summary I said, nevertheless, I hope you have numerous takeaways from these events, which are in your emotional brain and your rational brain. Maybe these two brains are in conflict with each other, which is also a good signal. But I think there have been several takeaways. I will not list them, just to give you what I take away. There was this brilliant analysis of poverty of territorialism by Andreas Faludi, who was not giving us an answer, but which nevertheless giving the base for discussion. He gave us at least this picture of archipelago of islands, to which we as Austrians, not having a sea, have to get used, but nevertheless it's a way forward. We had the presentation by Andres Rodriguez-Posey with the geography of discontent, which opens a way to the political dimension of our debate. So to discuss territorial aspects is not for insiders working on territorial. It has this very strong political dimension. I think this is also a takeaway. And Simin Davoudi's appeal to recall the values and to be clear on the wording, to use territorial spatial sensitiveness instead of territorial cohesion is also a takeaway. And last but not least, the presentation by Andrea Uliet, Kai Böhme, and added by Jerzy Schlachter of the strategic project still running, and we're looking forward to have further inspiring results next year. But we also heard not only optimism, but there was also skepticism in the room on the overall European project. I think a lot of work has to be done to work on the belief that the best times are still before us as Europeans. And I think this is also takeaways. And there was some very clear messages on different levels. Vincent Nadin recalled that only by changing the wording from planning to narrative, it doesn't change the substance. I remember Frederick Richter saying that maybe the old narrative is still valid. We only have to better to communicate it, so not swap the narratives too quick. And there was this implicit dimensions of radical change. So everything is wrong, what has been done in the past, vis-a-vis muddling through. Not this time, but at the last seminar, Susan Pocher from the University of Utrecht called it radical incrementalism, sorry, for stumbling over the word. So there is these big questions around how to approach this. As I said, I will not try a summary, but there were also, I think, the combination between the strategic debate and the workshops, the projects, is giving hope and food for thought to continue, that there are answers around at all levels, and work has to be continued, and hopefully ESPON project will fulfill these pilot fish functions also in the future. Yes, in this respect, I hope you have been encouraged to stay committed. In one of the workshops, Csaba Hende from the European Commission said, here we are all believers, so we don't have to convince each other, which has been said several times, but which also means that all of us are multipliers for us, so to take the message home. And ESPON is serving somehow as the secure, the stable home base also for the believers in order to continue. My last words are from the role of the Austrian presidency. We, as said in the beginning, we have focused on a few limited issues in the debate on territorial development, cohesion, and urban development, by trying to bridge those debates, not only ensuring continuity, which is our task as presidency, but also lead the question towards future perspectives, work on the timeline for the territorial agenda, work on the timeline also for the urban agenda, which was not so much in the focus this time. So towards this window of opportunity of the next 2 years, towards 2020, in complement to the program exercise. So we try to work on these interfaces. And the second dimension was to focus on the governance side, to get what could be done practically, what are governance elements also on the European level, which help all the other levels to deliver the nice words into action. ESPON was very supportive in this respect. We used ESPON inputs at several occasions. Thanks for that. We also tried not to forget this, that cooperation is not only a bottom-up exercise, it requires the EU formats, it requires the involvement of the European Commission, so certain European elements, and to work on these elements. This was in the forefront. In this respect, the seminar was somehow complementing what we have done, so we always saw it as a package. We also kept the best for the last, as Rado said. We have the seminar as the last element, because after this event we are stepping down from the stage. We are handing over the presidency to Romania, and we wish good luck for all the upcoming presidencies. We have there's also two takeaways from here. 2 things to do. The one is short-term. We prepare next week, together with our trio partner, Estonia and Bulgaria, a short policy note, conclusions of the trio in the work on territorial and urban development, to be handed over to Romanian and upcoming trios. We will report what we have done, but also we'll try to give an outlook, hooks, to how to continue. And we will also include a hook that the debate with stakeholders in these formats are important elements, and also the lessons we have learned out of this debate is this sense of urgency to not stay in between, like Helmut Hiss called it in his report, but somehow that we are approaching a strategic or an important phase in European integration. The second takeaway is on the national level, so I look rather to my colleagues from Austria, that of course we face the same challenge like all of you, to embed the European dimension into the national regional work, to continue to translate, to do this also at all levels in our international work, macro-regional, but national regional planning. We know that it's not easy, but we think the 6 months in the presidency, being a little bit closer, not only to the organization, but also to the substance, has not only taken a lot of energy from us, but also has given us some energy to continue these efforts on the national level. Maybe we will feel it only after Christmas, but we will continue to work on that. So these were my last words. Thank you all for participating. Yeah, I'm not the last speaker, but
excellent.
One sentence. Have a safe trip home, and hopefully the Santa Claus is still waiting for you when you're coming.
Excellent, Mano. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you from my side to the presidency and also to the venue here. It's been, for me as a moderator, an extremely straightforward place to be a moderator, because all of the technology has been so incredibly reliable. So thank you very much indeed to all of the people doing the live streaming and the technology. That's been an enormous help. So last but not least, I'm just going to give the floor finally to Ilona for a final word.
Yes, so what is there to say? I hope you really enjoyed the seminar program and the different sessions that we offered, that we organized in cooperation with you, and I thank you very much for all your contributions to the seminar program. I really hope that you found the 1.5 days with us enjoyable, inspiring, informative, and you will find you have found new ideas how to use ESPON, how to contribute to the work of ESPON. On behalf of the ESPON EGTC, I would like to particularly thank the Austrian presidency for supporting us in the organization, for co-organizing this event. We really found your support extremely useful, and I believe there are no enough words to say how thankful we are to you. Secondly, I would of course like to thank the team of the ESPON EGTC for the organization of this event. You know, they sometimes say that your success is defined by the quality of your strategy, but I would like to say that it's not only the quality of the strategy, it's actually in the strength and the brilliance of the team that you have to make sure that you are able to implement your strategy. And I'm very proud to say that I do have a brilliant team, and I'm very thankful to all of you working for the ESPON EGTC for organizing this event, and in particular to the two co-producers, the main co-producers of this event, to Gavin and to Sylvia. For bearing all the main burden, and I think that all of them deserve a big round of applause. And last but not least, to deserve lunch, you need to do one last thing. And remember, we had a vote at the beginning of the seminar to check, to see together with you if you are informed, if you are inspired, or if you are just only curious about the ESPON evidence. So I kindly invite you to again use your mobile devices and to answer this question one more time, to see how we have progressed in the course of the 1.5 days in terms of serving you and in terms of promoting your inspiration and your curiosity and informativeness about the work of ESPON. So if you would spend a couple of, actually 1 minute, maybe even less, for this vote, we would be very thankful, because this is also one part of our evaluation activities, to see how, what is our impact on your feelings, emotions, values, perceptions, and everything else that is important for us. Can we have a bit more of your votes? I don't remember how many we had yesterday. Can we reach 100? What do you think? It was 120 yesterday. Okay.
No lunch break until we get to 100.
Yeah, I didn't mean to be mean. Meanwhile, I would also like to thank, of course, the Austrian presidency for the wonderful dinner that we had yesterday. I believe we all enjoyed it, and especially the live performance of St. Nicholas and the entertainment and the presents, and also some wishes for the future.
94.
6 more? Can we get 6 more?
97, come on.
3 more.
Those last 3 people who've got 98. We're counting down. 100, yay!
Yay!
Oh, look at the result as well.
I think we have progressed substantially, because if you remember, then yesterday most of you were curious about ESPON's evidence. Today most of you is informed and inspired, and we are fully happy with this result. So thank you very much, enjoy the rest of the day, and we hope to see you in Romania next year.